Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it's
That was unique. That you know, there's like that's like main temperature. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are delighted to welcome you to Georgetown's Capitol campus. The blinds are automatic, but at some point they'll go up and you'll see Capitol view. On this beautiful spring day, to CSET's second spring symposium. Thank you so much for coming. We're here to explore how the US can build a productive and inclusive AI and emerging technology-enabled economy. My name is Helen Toner. I've been at CSET since the beginning, but for the past 6 months, I've had the honor of serving in the executive director role. And for those of you not familiar with CSET, we are an organization focused on informing high-impact decisions, high-stakes decisions about emerging tech and national security by providing rigorous, data-driven research, some of which you'll hear about today. Workforce and talent is a topic that goes back to CSET's founding days. If you know CSET, then you know that we love ourselves a whiteboard. And one of my earliest memories of CSET, 7 years ago, plus maybe a month or two, was our small initial team huddling around a whiteboard and figuring out, okay, we've founded a center to do emerging tech and national security. What the heck are we going to do now? And we wanted to map out our first set of research projects. And on the whiteboard, we started working through project ideas based around, this technology AI, which we had determined, this is 3 years before ChatGPT, but we knew that we wanted AI to be our primary focus as we got started for our first, couple of years at CSET. And on that whiteboard, we wanted to look at what are the key inputs to AI competitiveness. So one of them was data. At the time, data was pretty well covered, pretty widely discussed. This was the peak of the, data is the new oil years. Another was algorithms. We didn't necessarily feel like we had much to say on algorithms, but we did circle 2 other inputs to having a competitive AI ecosystem. One was semiconductors, at the time a very niche topic that coincidentally was a big focus of last year's spring symposium. The other was workforce and talent. With that began our research on workforce and talent, which has continued since that day. We began by working on how to build a strong workforce for what at the time was a relatively new technology. So against a backdrop of growing demand for AI talent, potential labor shortages, and a lot of interest in competition with China, what did it look like to build a strong workforce? So we did some early work kind of identifying potential labor shortages, looking at a question of what happened to high-skill immigrants. Did they stay? Did they go? Thinking about immigration policy against that backdrop, and understanding how to build a strong workforce in the earlier days of this technology. From there, another thing, if you know CSET, you know that we love data. And pretty quickly, as we started working on workforce issues, we realized that a lot of the data that policymakers need to understand this space and to know what to do to build a strong workforce doesn't really exist, or it's scattered, or the definitions or the occupational categories that we're using don't work for these newer technological workforces. So over time, we began to build out more work on understanding what is the AI workforce, what is an AI role, how big is the workforce, what kind of people and training is it made up of. We did this by having our in-house data scientists and engineers team up with our policy-focused researchers who understood, the context and the needs. We built our own definition of the AI workforce using a combination of government data, commercial data, looking at kind of real job postings. And from there, over time, we've been able to analyze and understand the AI workforce as a starting point, but now also other technology workforces. So the cybersecurity workforce, biotechnology, and we've been able to do that on a firmer and more evidence-based footing than has been possible elsewhere because of our ability to combine those data elements and the kind of policy and security focus. What we've found is that the workforce is in many ways there's more of a plurality of different types of workers, different types of pathways than many people assume. So, the really top PhD AI researchers get a lot of attention. But what we've found is that there's also a huge role for a wider range of pathways, non-traditional careers, apprenticeships, certifications, on-the-job training, really important roles for community colleges and technical schools, and just a more sort of complicated and interesting picture than you might think if you're just assuming that the pure focus should be on those very sort of high-end, top, most educated workers. And most recently, last year, we were really excited to release Pathwise, which I'd encourage everyone during the break to go and talk to my colleague Sonali, who has a live demo set up for you back there. Pathwise is an interactive tool. You can also find it yourself at pathwise.eto.tech on our emerging tech observatory. It's an interactive data visualization that allows you to look at on a state-by-state basis or smaller units of geographic units, look at both the supply and the demand of AI talent, of cyber talent, and we're building it out to cover other technology workforces as well. To again, look at what is the reality of what workforce exists and what workforce is needed, and how can we think about closing that gap. Today, unlike 7 years ago, AI and workforce issues are front page material. And we're so excited to get to spend this afternoon with you diving into these important topics. The arc of the day, we're going to start with our first panel looking at the current state of the AI workforce and of other technology workforces, understanding where we are. And over the course of the day, we'll work towards understanding where we're going and where we should go. So policy options, policy priorities. And in the middle, to tie those pieces together, we're delighted to welcome Senator Lisa Blunt-Rochester for a conversation. So the sequence of events will be our first panel on the current state of the AI and emerging technology workforce. And then we will take a break where you can go check out Pathwise before welcoming the senator to come in conversation with Axios senior tech reporter Ashley Gold to speak about strengthening the US tech workforce, some of the initiatives she has going on, and the way that she's looked at this over time, which in many ways is very concordant with CSET's approach, where step zero has to be making sure we have the data and we have the understanding to then make strategic policy looking forward. After that, we'll have a second panel focused on policies to bolster the workforce and what we can actually practically do and where we should turn from here. And following that, we'll have a reception, and we look forward to welcoming you all to stick around and mingle for as long as you have time. To wrap up, our workforce research and our workforce team have come a long way since that winter day in front of the whiteboard. Coming out of that meeting, we tasked a recent political science graduate with no workforce experience and an environmental lawyer with no workforce experience to strike off boldly into our first workforce projects. But as we can turn into our first panel here, I'm delighted to welcome Matthias Osinski, who leads our workforce team these days, to come to the stage. Matthias is a labor economist with degrees from Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, Julius Maximilians University in Würzburg, both in Germany, and Oxford University. And over the past 2 decades, he has worked in academia, the private sector, nonprofit organizations, and think tanks. He spent the past 2.5 years leading our work here at CSET on talent and the workforce, and he will be also leading/moderating our next panel. Thank you, Matthias.
You want to go?
Second scene.
Yeah, welcome and thank you very much. Welcome to the first panel. As Helen already said, the next decades will be defined by AI and emerging technologies, and the people side of this equation will play a large role in basically determining how can we reap the benefits from this technology and whether we can stay ahead on innovation in this area. And this raises questions around what is the state of the AI workforce, questions around reskilling, retraining, how is AI impacting the workforce, and questions around whether we even have the right data to measure what's going on and to make really well-informed labor market decisions. And to unpack all of this, we have a terrific panel with us together that brings expertise from government, industry, and research. I'd like to start by introducing Diana Gehlhaus. Diana joins us from MITRE, where she leads the community integration and engagement for Gen AI Mill, which also includes aspects of AI training. Before her time at MITRE, Diana was actually here at CSET as a research fellow, doing a lot of workforce research, and a senior advisor for talent at the DoD's Chief Digital and AI Office. So she has a deep expertise at the intersection of AI, national security, and workforce. I also want to note that Diana is here in a personal capacity, so she's not speaking on behalf of the department here. Next, I would like to welcome Lydia Logan. Lydia is the Vice President for Global Education and Workforce Development at IBM, where she also leads initiatives like IBM Skills Build to train learners in AI and other emerging tech skills. She has over 25 years of experience spanning industry, philanthropy, and policy, including also previous leadership roles at the US Chamber of Commerce and Verizon. Welcome, Lydia. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Sam Manning. Sam is a research fellow at the Center for Governance of AI and a non-resident fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation. He also has done research on the impact of AI and the workforce at OpenAI. And a good part of his research focuses on how frontier AI is actually disrupting labor markets and what's happening to workers there. He has published a recent study where he looks into how American workers are most or least equipped to adapt to the changes that are happening. And I'm also looking forward to dig into that a little bit today. So welcome all of you. And I'd like to start with a question for Diana. You spent a lot of years determining the AI workforce, measuring the AI workforce. So when we talk about the AI workforce, what should we be thinking about? And is the way we're defining it today still up to the task, given all the changes that we're seeing in the technology?
It's funny because, so hi everyone, good to see everyone today. It's funny because when I started thinking about this question, I guess now, approaching 6 years or 6 years plus, not to age myself, we didn't really have a good understanding of what the AI workforce was. And we really tried to tackle that question through a framework of, well, who's actually involved in the design, development, and deployment of AI? And, fast forward all these years later, I'm not convinced that we still do have a great definition because it really depends on how strict of an interpretation you have. And I think what has changed is people's awareness for how important this workforce is to the economy. But we still are a little bit squishy on exactly who counts and to what end. And what do I mean by that? I think you've got that very top tier of exquisite AI talent that was referenced in the opening remarks. And even that is bifurcated, right? You've got the really, really top tier that everybody's fighting over, that's all over in the news. And then you've got, your regular R&D tier who's still innovating, who's still on the leading edge. And they are computer scientists, they are driving, they are electrical engineers, they are driving the design of frontier AI models, right? But then you also have folks who are AI ML engineers and so on. And so even if you count this like immediate tier of technical folks, and I hear a lot of conflation too with technical talent and AI workforce. Okay, you've got this kind of really core group, but to me, that's not sufficient because you can have an AI model, but it does no good if it's not actually integrated in a platform of, and available and deployed appropriately. And so you have what I increasingly think of as an AI enablement workforce. And this is where you get the cyber talent, the network architects, a lot of data talent, technical product managers and program managers. And that's kind of your next level down of without this workforce, you don't have, and the AI workforce becomes a bit less meaningful. And then you kind of layer down to folks, data centers, energy, chips, right? You get those levels. And so to me, I think of it more as like a tiered approach to thinking about the AI workforce. And even if you think about it that way, it's still not perfect because our statistical infrastructure just continues to be a bit slow to really help identify who within the software engineering workforce is actually working on AI, for example.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. And some of your research also found that the DoD is actually a really top employer of technical talent, but often that talent is hidden. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I had looked into several years ago was, okay, if we want to better understand trends with this, this really important group of technical workers, who's actually employing them? Where are they? What can we understand about the supply and demand dynamics of, for example, software engineers, computer scientists, electrical engineers, and so on? And when I looked at the official statistical data, I saw that, in fact, the national security was a top employer of this talent. And that seemed to be different from the narrative of the department and the national security community have a real challenge when it comes to recruiting this talent. And so that kind of led me to explore a little bit more. Fast forward, and it turns out that they do employ a lot of technical talent, but they're in a whole bunch of occupations that you wouldn't think to go look for them in. So that just reinforces the data mismatch. And then also the department, a lot of, I'm really versed in the Department of War, for example, but a lot of these organizations, and I don't think it's unique to the national security community, but it's hard to necessarily identify this talent if they're not hired in a certain pathway, and you aren't able to leverage that talent and retain that talent.
Thank you. Just want to change the perspective a little bit to the overall impact of AI on the labor market. So, as I mentioned, Sam, you have a recent report out where you look into the exposure of AI and then how people have, I think you called it adaptive capacity to AI. And can you highlight what the major findings are and what surprised you maybe about this study that you found?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah. So you may have seen there's lots of headlines about AI's impact on jobs, and a lot of times the concern is around job displacement. As I think is evident, we don't really have a great way to measure or predict labor demand outcomes from AI exposure, right? From the fact that AI might be useful across a bunch of different occupations, but we do have these measures of where AI might be relevant for workers and helpful for workers in the labor market, and where it might cause some sort of disruptions, positive or negative. What we wanted to look at was basically taking seriously the prospect that there probably is going to be some level of displacement due to AI across the economy, but then asking the next question of, this, involuntary job loss doesn't impact all workers in the same way, right? You can imagine if you're a software engineer in San Francisco versus a legal secretary or an administrative assistant or something like this in a rural part of the country. There's a bunch of different individual level factors that might moderate your ability to manage a job transition. We tried to build a data set on factors that could drive this adaptive capacity, a worker's ability to manage a job transition, find work at comparable wages relatively easily, to give policymakers a sense of, if you're concerned about negative downside impacts of disruption, where might you want to focus your attention for supporting workers, and where might workers be especially sort of resilient to this change. And so the headline finding is a positive one. It's that for the most part, this AI exposure measure, so the types of jobs that are more likely to be impacted by AI, do have lots of factors that make these workers quite resilient. So higher savings on average, more likely to live in big cities with thick labor markets and lots of opportunities, more wider skill sets and things like this. But we find that there's a segment of the labor market that's about 6 million or so workers in a group of occupations where this is not the case, where you have high potential for disruption and a bunch of factors that make it the case that workers are going to face stronger than kind of relative to the rest of the workforce, stronger constraints on finding that next job, lower savings, narrow set of skills, living in places where there aren't as many opportunities, being older, which older workers throughout history, the literature shows if you lose your job, it's harder to transition to changing skill demands. Just quickly on a surprising thing, the share, like where these impacts are concentrated, the kind of 6.1 million workers, is kind of interesting, and I wouldn't have predicted it beforehand, but it's primarily concentrated in small, like, state capitals and in university and college towns. Why? Because the workers who are in these roles are largely in administrative and clerical occupations, and these make up a large share of government jobs and university sort of administrative jobs. And so absolute terms, New York City has the most kind of the highest number of these workers, but in terms of the share of local employment and where people might be able to switch to, it's in this kind of very specific place of, Springfield, Illinois, Laramie, Wyoming, Stillwater, Oklahoma, these types of places that are, the local labor market is built around a type of employer that has a bunch of these occupations that kind of fit in this low adaptive capacity, high exposure category.
So you do find regional disparities as well?
Yeah, I think it's mostly like even down to the like the kind of city or metropolitan statistical area. I wouldn't generalize to say something like, the Midwest or the Pacific Northwest has, this differential sort of disparities. But I think in terms of, if you're a policymaker and you're trying to think about, okay, where are my which of my constituents should I be worried about in terms of potential disruptive impacts? I think at least we offer like a framework here for at the quite local labor market level, who to pay attention to and who to try to invest in getting more visibility into, which is kind of at this, like quite local labor market rather than regional or something like that.
Okay,
That makes
that's good to know. Thanks. And that leads me to a question for Lydia. So IBM is committed to train 30 million people in new skills by 2030, and I think 2 million learners specifically in AI. So from your work, what are these skills, these AI skills that employers actually are looking for right now? And is the reality that you see matching up to the hype that we hear around AI, or is there a difference?
Yeah, so I think from our position, there are people whose jobs will be augmented, right? There will be some displacement, but a lot of augmentation across roles of all levels, separate from just the high-end, high-tech computer science, data science engineers, right? So we've got a core of people who are creating new technology, but as generative AI becomes more and more available to people and advances to the point where you don't need deep engineering or coding expertise in order to create a new agent or tool that will help you do your job better, it means more and more people in other roles need to have some digital literacy, digital capacity, understanding about AI, how to apply it. And so what's happening very quickly is, yes, there is more need for people who are in that high-tech category, but the major shifts are happening outside of those roles, because people were not expecting to be an English literature major or a nurse, or like pick your sector or your role. They weren't thinking about how some new technological advance would impact their job, and it is. And so there's we're seeing changes in the need for those people in those roles to become aware, literate, fluent, and upskilled. But the uptake there, I think, is very uneven, where in the higher tech roles, the uptake is very, it's very quick because everyone understands the importance of the technology. They understand the shifts that are happening, and so they are generally earlier adopters.
Okay. And I think IBM Global estimated that about 40% of the global workforce needs to be reskilled because of AI. Does this still hold up with the progress that we're making in technology? And does this match to the US, or is the picture a little different for the US?
So our Institute for Business Value interviewed CEOs, and CEOs said about 40% of their workforce needed upskilling over the next 3 years as a result of AI's impact in the workforce. So that is keeping trend. That's keeping rate pace. What we're seeing is keeping pace. I think the response to different countries is where we see differences. And I don't, we may get into that a little bit later, but many countries are now having sort of a top-down initiative around upskilling their citizens. It may start as early as, grade school and go through university level and into the workforce. But they have some sort of a national focus, right? America has started to come up with some of these same initiatives, but countries are starting an AI workforce initiative, investing in it, creating policies, creating educational standards, and everyone is sort of lining up behind those. Employers are often ahead of the trend, so they're often saying, these are the workers we need who have these skills, and now we need the education system and the workforce preparation system to keep pace, right? What the X factor is right now is you all read the headlines, every few days, there's a new release of a technology that does something that, wasn't available 30 days ago. So that becomes a bit of the challenge. But to your question, yes, we are seeing those trends keep pace. We are seeing that companies need to upskill their current workforce, and they are looking for people coming in with skills who are already ready to adapt. And that's, that is basically a new phenomenon as a result of AI in the workforce.
And when you survey the CEOs, I'm wondering, do you also ask for their own willingness to train their own workforce? Because I lived in Canada for quite some time, and in Canada it was always this, we need workforce training, but that's the government's job, and this is not our job as the company. So I'm wondering if there's a willingness, from the company themselves to invest in workforce training, or if there's still the view somebody else should do the training.
I'm not sure I don't think the study looked at that per se, right? Were they willing to do it or not? They acknowledged absolutely it needed to happen. IBM actually does a lot of work with companies on employee upskilling. We have a talent transformation practice as part of our consulting business. We have a client zero perspective where we do it first, and then whether it's a product that we have developed and our own employees are using it, or it's an upskilling initiative, we have what we call the watsonx Challenge. All IBMers had to do some training on watsonx. We formed teams. We came up with solutions that were in our workflows that would make our own jobs more productive, save time, save money, save something. And then all of those projects were submitted. A handful were selected, and either IBM Consulting or Software, some of our other divisions, would invest in further developing them and rolling them out company-wide. So this is a way that we're getting buy-in. We're also crowdsourcing our best new innovations. We're finding ways to improve and new use cases for the technology we have. But it can't only be top-down in order for it to work. You have to have top-down support and a certain amount of demand. But if people are not willing to take hold of the technology and understand what it can do for them, the what's in it for me factor, they won't do it just because you said do it, right? It can't be all stick. There has to be some carrot.
Yeah. We also mentioned, in the beginning that there's some data challenges, maybe for labor market policies, and we often hear that there are data gaps. Helen also mentioned our Pathwise tool that tries to do some work on that. And then maybe it's a question for Diana, since you have a lot of experience with this. Where do you see the biggest data gaps, and what kind of data would we need in order to do a better job in assessing what is technology actually doing in the labor markets, and how can we help the workforce in this transition?
Yeah, this is a complex question. I think there's a lot of gaps, and I think that's evidenced by so many amazing researchers out there trying to understand things like what is the impact of AI on the labor market, on different segments of the workforce, trying to understand the technical workforce. And I think you see over and over so much ends up being dependent on your underlying assumptions, your model, your framework, right? And it just goes to show you that our data is just really imprecise and too laggy. And so what I mean by that is you've got, occupations that do get updated once in a while, but the workforce doesn't, when you go to a company, it doesn't break down like that. I mean, that's the government trying to put everybody into what they see as occupational boxes. And that's really messy already. And I think all of this is just, the trend where everybody is suddenly able to be more of a technologist it just makes everything really messy and really complicated. And so one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about is this question of like, okay, well, what data do we need when we see survey response rates for federal statistical data going down, when we see some of these statistical programs losing funding, not increasing funding, when we see the rise of using proprietary data to try to triangulate, like the Burning Glass Institutes of the world and Revelio and LinkedIn, right, that have these amazing data repositories that can in real time help us identify trends. One of the things I'd love to see personally is an overhaul of ONET. I think that it has been really good. It is a gold standard, but it's just almost misleading, in my opinion, in the sense of giving some false security of what folks actually do in a given job, because I think there is so much heterogeneity within a given occupation. It's really hard to say that you spend this much of your time doing this and it's at this level of complexity and at this level of importance, but so much of what we're trying to tease out is based off of that. So I'd actually love to see a little bit of a revamp of an ONET 2.0 personally, but I think there's a bunch of data gaps, and it's an important question, and it's something that needs to be a public-private partnership.
Sam?
Offer a few takes on this as well. So, all right, so some concrete things that I would love to see as well. A major gap that we have now is we don't really have visibility into enterprise and firm level adoption of AI systems. This is important if you care about workforce impacts, because you can imagine two things. One, well-capitalized companies are going to be the ones who can afford lots of compute and to build processes that automate lots of things and drive organizational change and automation, et cetera. We should have, better visibility allows us to predict these things, predict how competition dynamics might shape out in different industries. I think there's some pretty low-hanging fruit to advance visibility here. We have an annual business survey that we run every year, and for some reason, we only ask about AI like once every 5 years. Seems like this is enough of a national priority that probably it makes sense to ask businesses in our largest national, survey of businesses, how they're adopting and using AI, at what scale, what they expect, what they've observed about how it's changed their hiring and skill demands, and what they expect it to do in the future. And then I also think there's opportunity to push on the private sector. I don't think it needs to be the case that we have government, surveys doing all the data collection here, but we can take advantage of the fact that most of the high frequency valuable data is in the private sector, both on the AI usage side from model developers and on the skills, wages, and employment side from ADP, LinkedIn, Burning Glass, these types of places, but bring a lot more of this data together so that researchers can then have access to it. I'm excited about the AI Workforce Research Hub that was announced out of the action plan. That's going to hopefully start up soon at the Department of Labor, hopefully could play this sort of role. And the last point is that on filling talent gaps, I'm not an expert on this, but I guess my first instinct would be, well, we have these job platforms that are hiring. We can observe where the skill demands are changing, but I think that a lot of the most valuable jobs in the sort of AI workforce supply chain might be missed by platforms like LinkedIn. I'm not sure what share of sort of advanced manufacturing technician jobs and these types of things are super present on these sort of traditional. Maybe it's the case that they are, but I think there's probably gaps here that could be filled by more creative engagement with the private sector and with community organizations that are working to try to fill some of these talent gaps. And I think this is a core, challenge. Like we have so much uncertainty about how much continued AI progress is going to shape the demand for labor and skills and how we can take advantage of all the benefits of AI. And so like, yeah, working on all these dimensions to try to improve our visibility can help us be more prepared and to get the most out of these, this sort of technological transition.
And I also think with the AI adoption, I think it's kind of crucial to understand, because if you don't have visibility enough into the adoption process, you don't know if you have the talent.
Yeah.
What the talent pool look like to, do they have the expertise to use this better, and what kind of talent pipeline do we actually need? So I think that's a really crucial aspect. So I see you.
No, I was going to say some of it also to your point about large companies having the ability to compute and access to the tools. You might have higher adoption of smaller companies if the people in those companies had access, right? So there are some things that we may not know because we are taking characteristics of large companies and applying them to companies of different sizes, or I'm saying companies, but it really could be any organization. I think the other thing that sort of masks change is job titles stay the same, but the skills required to be successful in those jobs underneath are shifting. I had a conversation with one of our leading our software leaders, and he said the entry-level software developer role, those titles are the same, but he said it was a job where you would come in, you learn on the job, you join a team, you participate in developing a new product, you learned about architecture, you learned all kinds of things, and then you went through an MVP, through demo, through go-to-market. Now you're expected to do a lot of that as an individual contributor. You're expected to know architecture, you're expected to know what good looks like, you're expected to be able to sort of test and revise on your own and bring that to somebody who's more senior and work out some of those changes with your manager, and then maybe it goes to a team farther down the development process. Those changes are not necessarily going to be picked up in LinkedIn job posting data, because those changes underneath may not be immediately visible.
So does this change the skill requirements for the entry-level jobs then already?
I think in general for almost all entry-level jobs, I mean, all is saying a lot, but what people are expected to know and be able to do when they walk in the door, regardless of role, I think is shifting.
Okay. And how do you in industry think about, Diana said rightly, I think that, government always puts these into the occupational codes and so on. And I think for you, it's a very different perspective. How do you think about roles and occupations from the industry perspective?
So I sit in our corporate social responsibility function, where I'm responsible for the education workforce development programs that we offer for free externally around the world. I work very closely with our talent acquisition teams and our HR teams. And so what we do is we take the entry level and mid-level jobs that IBM may be hiring for that are aligned to the programs that we offer, like Skills Build, and make sure that we are designing experiences so that people who are finishing those programs have what our talent acquisition teams would be looking for. It is not necessarily what every single one of our clients may be looking for similar people on a path to similar roles, but we think it's a good proxy that allows us to move quickly and keep that alignment in place. We then can start to see, right, how successful people are, but back to data gaps, they have to be willing to tell us what happens to them next. So there are a lot of incomplete data sets around mobility, advancement. I think the other thing is a lot of us used to look at hiring, someone participated in an apprenticeship, a job training program, fill in the blank. And then we looked at, did they get hired? What kind of job did they get? Now people are trying to keep the job they have. They're not just trying to get a new job. And so I think that's another thing that's going to mask, right, effectiveness of skilling programs or what skills people need.
Yeah. And speaking of skilling programs, that's maybe then a question for you, Sam, with the study that you found that, if the adaptive capacities are so unevenly distributed in the country, what does it imply for policy response about skilling the workforce and programs for reskilling people?
Yeah, I think the most applicable sort of takeaway from at least just our narrow work, is that it can be a way to prioritize investment and kind of visibility. If you assume that policymakers and government here have sort of resource constraints, so you can't sort of optimally sort of address job transition gaps or skills development gaps for the entire workforce per se, or maybe we should aspire to that, but like you have to assume we're working under constraints. There's a lot of uncertainty about this, how this technology is going to take hold. And so the thing that you can do maybe through using this adaptive capacity lens is say, okay, well, seems like if software engineers and lawyers and partners at law firms and these types of things are the ones that people speculate we're worried about displacement, there's like a lot of potential opportunities for these folks to make transitions to other jobs in adjacent industries. But here's the segment of the labor market and the parts of the country and local labor markets where that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. And so if we're going to try to pilot new sorts of approaches to making the workforce more resilient, to incentivizing on the job training, to think about retraining and these types of AI literacy approaches, but we don't really know exactly what works. You can maybe decide that you want to prioritize it on parts of the labor market that you in expectation would think might most benefit.
Can I just quickly follow up on
Of
that?
course.
Just given my experience, so again, speaking personally, so I lead all education and training related to GenAI.mil. And it has really been an interesting, eye-opening experience because what you see are different types of learners. And so it's not even just the who needs training, it's the how do they need training. And how are they able to be empowered to use these tools on their job? And it's not even just, it's not enough to say, here's what an LLM, and then, what content. It's not enough to say, what is an LLM? And yes, you should just trust it, or you need to verify everything. That's daunting for some people. And then you have a whole group of folks who I have heard the argument, I will say, that you don't need training. People just need to just jump in and use the tool, and that's it. Figure it out, learn. And these are very intellectually curious folks who want to experiment, learn by doing, and that's wonderful. But it's really hard to just lump like AI literacy or AI education into one bucket when you're talking about adult learners, because it is a very diverse population.
Yeah, and maybe just to sidestep for a moment, there's a recent study out that actually looks into AI skills in, I think, 1,500 students at 500 different universities in Germany, the United States, and the UK. And they looked into this as well, like how are they acquiring AI skills? And in Germany, it's more formalized. In the US, it's more just, here's a tool. And in the UK, it's even worse, I think. And the outcomes were basically the German students had the highest AI skills because of the formalized training. In the US, the confidence was the highest, but the competence was fairly low because people just used it, the way they were thinking of using it. So maybe that also speaks to what you just said about like how do we need to teach these skills. And but that brings me a little bit back to when we say AI literacy. What do we actually mean by that? Because it's a term that's often used. So do you guys have a good way of like a good definition around what we should mean by an AI literate workforce?
We think about literacy as sort of the beginning of the spectrum. It's awareness, understanding what AI is, what it isn't, how it can be used. It's sort of the top line domain knowledge. Fluency starts to be about application. How can I use it? When should I use it? What kinds of things should I be checking to make sure, to validate that what I'm getting is what I need? And so that for us is the big difference. I think everybody needs literacy, and increasingly everyone is going to need to become fluent with respect to their role or the role that they're interested in getting. These are great opportunities for public-private partnerships because as technology advances and industry usually is on the front edge, We need to make sure that policies keep pace, education and workforce development systems keep pace, that we don't end up with a lag between what's expected of you in a role and what's available to you for upskilling or reskilling or just skilling, right? You're coming out of a system prepared for what enterprise is expecting from you. And I'm saying enterprise again, but this, assuming we have high functioning organizations, it should be NPOs, nonprofits, enterprise, right? In a job, you should understand how to apply it well. And that is the new baseline.
Any thoughts?
So I think that's generally true. I do think there is not necessarily I think there's consensus in some communities and not in others. I think when you talk about using AI in a personal capacity, just general, you and me as a citizen and a civilian, yes, you would like to have this foundational understanding of what an LLM is and how does it work and what does appropriate use look like and how can I validate and what's good prompt engineering, right? Like these are all considered foundational skills or that foundational understanding of Gen AI, and we're talking mostly about Gen AI here. And then it's like to the fluency part, I would say it almost is at the enterprise level. I think folks do think of being able to apply AI tools to your workflow as AI literacy. And so like there is a conversation about, well, how much background do they need to have as opposed to just understanding how to prompt and thinking through great use cases in your mission set, in your workflow. Because it's a little, and there's a translation gap. I've spoken with Frontier AI Labs about this between how folks are using it in their personal lives and how they're using it in their professional lives. And so to me, that's another dimension of this.
Okay, thanks.
I think maybe the only thing I'll add is, yeah, I guess I have this, I think it's probably likely that variation in AI fluency is going to matter more and more going forward. Like if you take seriously the sort of productivity potential of really being able to leverage frontier AI systems, then, a lot of your ability to remain competitive and at the top of your field is largely going to, at least partially going to be increasingly sort of determined by how well you can manage AI systems, how well you know when to rely on them, how to boost your productivity and your capability set. And so, yeah, it does seem like while we are, I like this layered kind of framework that you mentioned, where it does seem like foundational AI literacy, having some intuition for when these systems are reliable, when they're not, how they generally work, seems absolutely foundational. And then moving forward, this being able to equip your workforce as an employer to really embrace and drive forward, kind of pushing the frontier of what's possible with these systems is going to make a big difference in terms of how productive, how productivity gains from these tools are going to flow through the economy.
Yeah. And speaking of a skilled workforce and the hiring process, I think you testified at Congress about the need for skills-based hiring over degree-based hiring, and I think a lot of labor economists would agree with you.
So it's not over, but it is definitely not every job requires a 4-year degree. And are we actually being very intentional about paying attention to which roles require a degree? I mean, people work for decades. Their degree is not always relevant. I mean, yesterday I talked to the CFO of our software business. He was a music major, right? So what he's doing now is not what his degree was about, but he is incredibly successful and he's been at IBM 22 years and he said he had 20 different roles while he's been there. So I think we have to, think about lifelong learning. We have to think about when degrees are relevant, but you will need additional training, skilling, certification, certificates throughout your career in order to keep pace. What we do with those additional credentials, are they recognized by applicant tracking and hiring systems? They will continue to evolve and change, but the need to be a continuous learner won't change. I mean, that is going to be, absolutely what needs to happen. And again, public-private partnerships to think about how these systems have to work together to keep pace is going to be very important. IBM eliminated the 4-year degree requirement from 50% of our US job postings because we realized many of those roles did not require a 4-year degree. They required people who had some experience and had an understanding of how to do the job and could show what they could do. And that did not require a degree.
And do you think, industry as a whole has made progress there in terms of emphasizing this, or?
I think the realization that many jobs do not require a 4-year degree is certainly relevant. I think CEOs are thinking about, where do I get the best talent? And how can I make sure that those people have what they need to be successful? And getting the best talent does not always mean getting somebody with a 4-year degree or more. Where I think, IBM is a very large global company. We have hiring distributed across the company. So not all hiring managers sit in HR or talent acquisition. They are dispersed across the company. We have to go through training to be a hiring manager. So if we have a role that comes open on our team, we are required to go through some training before we go into the hiring process.
Mhm.
That is not necessarily true everywhere, but I think if companies are going to be very serious about eliminating a 4-year degree, making sure that you're getting selection right, you have to identify all your hiring managers and make sure that they have what they need to do their job. Where I think as a, adoption to skills first hiring is slow, the infrastructure to do it, as I mentioned, like do your ATS systems recognize and accept some of the credentials that are out there? That's a bottleneck for a lot of organizations.
Yeah. Maybe that's related to some of your experience, because you have a lot of experience now with organizations, large organizations adopting AI. What do you find there? Like, what distinguishes those who are successful from those who are struggling?
Oh, goodness. I think we're still teasing that out because I think we're still very early on the J curve of AI adoption. If I can just really quickly go back, because I think the talent point is a big one here. The government has been really trying to lean in on skills-based hiring. We've seen a lot of executive orders. We've seen things like the Competes Act, right? From Congress, right? Everybody recognizes this. And just really wonky, I'll say the cybersecurity workforce is probably the best example of a community that's really tried to get skills-based hiring down because they just were having such a talent shortage problem. And I applaud that community. And as we think about some of these other types of technical talent, and going back to the beginning comments of, it is really hard to define some folks with key skill sets that may be part of the broader technical workforce. What the beauty of in the cyber workforce, they have something called work roles in the government, and you can have 3 per position coded to you. And what that does is it helps align the requirement for that position with the skills that you need to be successful in that position. And then you can work with, they have a whole CSET's done amazing research on the Centers for Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity. It's all skills-based. And then you can have skills-based assessments and skills-based hiring that allow you, and there still is a degree in the middle there, but it allows you to really think about it in a skills-based way. And they've been piloting to do it without having to have a degree. Anyway, I say all of this because it is a really important topic. There has been some good work done. It's just you need to keep the drumbeat. You need to keep the momentum because it is still a wild, wild west of uncertainty for, excuse me, employers. I think when you get rid of the degree requirement, they just don't know. There's still an uncertainty from hiring managers from HR of how to fairly and accurately assess folks. So I just want to double tap what you said. In terms of organizations adopting AI, it really is so much driven by culture and leadership. I have to, it is top down, it is bottom up. Where is it, where do I see success happening? Where it is encouraged, where it's not like you have to, it's, you know, it's carrots and sticks. It is part of the culture. It is, say at the Department of War, all public, they put out an AI strategy. It's we are AI first. This is coming from our leadership. It is a priority. We are going to make strategic investments to build an enterprise-wide capability so that everybody has access to commercial parity, frontier AI tools. It is empowering leaders saying, no, how can I understand these tools? How can I use these tools? How can I empower my workforce? It is, oh, now we are, folks on the ground building applications, solving problems using these tools. And then all of a sudden that gets rewarded and scaled, even if that's not something that they are doing as part of their day job. So I think there's a lot of factors that make AI adoption successful, but it's got to be driven top down and bottom up.
I think it's the intersection of change management and organizational behavior, right? So we know there is a lot of research on both of those things. This is where technology enters into that intersection.
Yeah.
And we've seen it before. We've seen it across education systems. We've seen it across enterprise when we introduced the internet. There are lots of other things which weren't that long ago, where getting adoption right happened, and we shouldn't forget that we know how to do this, and that it does get down to people. If people are not seeing the value and using it and getting rewarded not only for success, but also for trying, failing, recovering, and moving forward. Because if people are too scared to fail, they won't try. And I think that's something else, right? This is part of the IBM culture, is we are expected to try new things, try new adaptations, use some technology, the frontier technology. If it doesn't work, that's okay. And so, you have to have some conversations about risk and reward. How big is the risk, right? We're not risking client data, but you have to take some level of risk, and you have to be willing to try new things, and it has to be safe for you to try new things in order to accelerate adoption.
Yeah, thanks. I want to be mindful of time and leave sufficient time for Q&A from the audience. Before I hand it over to the audience, I just wanted to point out again, we talked a lot about data gaps and how we're trying to fill it. So if that interests you, we have a demo of our Pathwise tool during the break that follows. And our competent colleagues from the data team will be happy to demonstrate this for you. So for the portion of the Q&A, I would like to encourage students in the room with a question to start first. If you are a student, have a question, raise your hand, there will be a mic coming to you. And then after a few questions from students, we'll open it up to the room, to the broader room. Okay, there's a question there.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Q. I'm 21. I am a computer science student at the University of Maryland. I grew up here in Maryland all my life, and I'm now on leave to work independently in AI because I personally believe that I can, learn a little faster than the traditional academic setting. I've also worked at various startups, JP Morgan, Adobe, Anthropic. So this is a very popular conversation that goes along many different circles. My first question is for Sam. I know we mentioned ADP, Burning Glass, getting data from LinkedIn, Indeed, which, just to put it out there, I think a lot of smaller companies, startups, top tech talent is also going to smaller places such as Greenhouse, Lever Jobs. Suppose that tomorrow you woke up and you were able to consolidate, whether by regulation or by force, all the private data of the people who have applied to jobs in the past 2 months to decades. What would you say is in your role model of what happens next on getting data? And now is it like, okay, we're seeing these trends and now we're going to put out by force, this is now the next thing that has to happen. I would like for you to maybe speak more on that. And then also on the thing of big gaps and incentives, I completely agree with Lydia. I wanted to note that maybe this is more of a comment, seeing that there is this rising gap already in tech talent where a lot of these folks in frontier labs and at these startup companies are saying, well, we're looking for people who are able to already not even upskilled, already are qualified and know how to do XYZ. And there's just such a small subset of those people, whereas the rest of our computer science students are just, going down that traditional path. And I'm afraid personally, having worked in both research, engineering, and policy, that it's the people that are not necessarily not qualified, but just maybe not up to speed, who are leading students in general in different directions that might not really benefit them in the future to prepare them for this kind of workforce. Those are just my 2 cents, but overall, would love to hear more about what you would do if you were already given this power and data. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So my vision for this is we have, if you say you're able to get the universe of say just ADP data plus job posting data, then right now on we have more visibility on the AI adoption and usage side than we did say a year ago, mostly due to Anthropic's efforts around their economic index. But still, it's the case that usage of Claude, it looks much different than usage of ChatGPT, and we have this gap on firm level enterprise usage from all the sort of model providers. So my vision here would be if we can start to collect more granular data than is available from the government surveys, from ADP, from LinkedIn, these sources, these private sector sources that are higher sample size and higher frequency, then you can sort of pair these two things of increased visibility on the AI usage side at the occupation level. Granted, there's ONET, we'd all love ONET to be better for sure. And I think there's classification issues, but I think since we can aggregate at the occupation level from the usage side, we can infer occupation. And then we get this occupation level data on the employment indicator side. Basically, this gives us infrastructure to track trends over time. And as AI usage, becomes a bigger part of the economy, and we can zoom in a little bit at higher granularity to different geographies and within industries on the usage side, and have the infrastructure in place to sort of we're not even worried about causality at this point. It's just can we map the trends in employment indicators and in demand for different types of jobs against indicators of observed AI usage and adoption. And I think this sort of being able to have these data sources that you can empirically track over time should give policymakers and society a bit more visibility than we currently have into where we're seeing, lots of opportunity and growth in certain sectors that are adopting and using AI, and where there's, negative impacts around, higher frequency of job transitions and displacement and things like this. I hope that answers your question, and I'm happy to talk more about it.
Do you want to react to this?
Yeah,
Amber?
sure. So this year, IBM announced that we were hiring several thousand people. This is on trend with our hiring levels. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that my team with our Skills Build program is aligning it to talent acquisition and what our different divisions are looking for in those hires. And some of them are early career and some are mid-career. But a lot of it is around applied technology use. So we have, one of the offerings that we have is a 10-week build teams of up to 5 students or learners. If they're adult learners, they get access to the technology, they get support from a team of IBM SMEs, they build something, they get to present it to IBMers. We are looking at rating against a rubric so that they know and we know sort of what the work quality is. So there are different toll gates, right? Did you register? Did you complete? What was the quality of the work that you did? But it does a lot of things. It gives students an idea of what's expected of you, the kinds of projects are expected of you in the workplace. It gives them something to put in a portfolio that they can share with prospective employers or other higher ed institutions. It gives them access to grow, to IBMers, to grow their professional network. And it gives them credentials that they can share on LinkedIn or other places. So we really have looked, and it's given them work that's aligned, right, to real demands from enterprise today. So we have been very intentional about the program design and the student experience. So from both sides, and then how we engage faculty and university leaders. Just one more point on your comment is, I talk to deans and engineering schools a lot, and they say, what should we be teaching? And one of the things I say is, we work with agents all the time. We think about ourselves as working in hybrid teams of humans and agents. If you're not talking to your students about that being the reality of the workplace today or in the very near future. So for us, it's today. For you, I'm sure it's today, right? But then that's a miss. That's a bit of a miss. And if you're engineering students, I was in a lab and they were running they're working in teams, running an experiment. And I said, are you asking your students to create an agent, figure out for this project which part of the project they will outsource to the agent, which part they're keeping for the students to do as humans, how they're checking the work product of the agent, and then how they bring it all back together when the project is finished. Because that is more like what work looks like, at least in a tech company today.
Mhm.
And they said, we had never thought about doing that.
Any other? I saw another hand here. Oh yeah.
Thank you so much for the very insightful panel. My name is Bhumika, and I'm also working at CSET on the AI governance and the regulatory archive, which is another tool within the Emerging Tech Observatory. My question is around the definition of the AI workforce. I think Diana tried to define it in a tiered way. I was wondering if the AI governance side of it and those who are actively trying to, let's say, do red teaming of the models and ensure AI safety will also count as a part of the AI workforce. Like, will you include that part? Because when I look at AI, I look at it in the form of a value chain, which goes from model developers to deployers to also the regulators. So when we look at the workforce, do we also count that part of it? And then the second question is open to anybody who would sort of want to answer it, which is when we look at the public sector AI workforce, are they trained at par with the private sector AI workforce? Let's say when the private sector is doing public-private partnership and sharing the data, for instance, if Anthropic is sharing its model usage data, then do we have enough stakeholders within the public sector as regulators or as others who are able to probe that data for, let's say, the methodology and other things? Thank you.
Thanks, Diana.
So to your first question, excellent question. I wasn't trying to be exhaustive when I was naming occupations. Yes, I think the T&E workforce is a pretty critical part of the development process and the deployment process. And so I definitely think that is an important part. And if you think about the background of T&E folks, you get back to technical talent. And so yes, I didn't mean to not include the T&E community, because I do think that they play a pretty critical role in the design, development, deployment of AI and AI-enabled capabilities. To your other question, I know it's funny because we hear so much about the reverse, about how economists at Census Bureau and other places the government shares its micro data, and there's always seminars and other opportunities for researchers to leverage government micro data. And this is NSF also, they do a lot of work on that front. But is the reverse true? I would like to think that maybe, but I hear less about Anthropic sharing its data with government. Maybe you all have heard more examples of this.
I think in terms of who's sharing data, I think at the kind of model developer level, there's some variation where Anthropic has really led the way and is like, their economic index report is producing a lot of useful information about usage. OpenAI has written a couple papers and just released their OpenAI Signals initiative, which has some similar data with some slight discrepancies in terms of how usage is classified in terms of tasks and occupations. But I think I'm not clear that there is sufficient sort of technical capacity in government to then, if that was your question, to then sort of be able to make optimal use of that data to inform policy. I don't know if it needs to be the case that there's these bilateral data sharing relationships with, between private sector and government only. I think academics and think tanks can play a role here. But it also strikes me that one of the most impactful things you could do is try to build government technical capacity. And if people want to go into government and try to be the technical people in the Commerce Department and the Department of Labor and these places, that seems like an incredibly impactful opportunity to then, build and foster these partnerships, but also be able to analyze this kind of emerging data to then, make policymakers more agile.
I think I saw another hand here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is also Bhumika. I also work with the ETO team at CSET. Thank you so much for all your insights. I think it's very timely that we're having this discussion today in light of Anthropic also having released the labor impact research study just a week ago, which builds on the economic index work. So it maps out the observed exposure of AI in the workforce as well as against what is theoretically possible with AI, right? And it maps out all the different industries that might be impacted. If you were to look at the more popular or what were thus far the most popular sectors like finance, management consulting, etc., you see that business adoption of AI right now doesn't match up with what it could potentially do. However, considering in the coming years, if it was able to get to the point where there's more and more business adoption and AI is able to do more and more of this work, could you inevitably then say that, well, there are some jobs which will vanish, right? For instance, if we were to look at middle management, right now, of course, like it's younger people aged 22 to 25, whose jobs, of course, like there's unemployment or at least reduction in the level of recruitment that was happening. Older people, of course, as Sam also mentioned, are exposed, but at least so far, it seems as though the middle management might be safe. But what happens the coming years when there is increasing adoption, or at least we're able to match up between what is possible with AI and what we're actually doing?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be surprising if some jobs, didn't go away. I think we should basically expect that as we are introducing this labor-saving technology, widely across the labor market that has this sort of general purpose characteristic to it, which means it's going to spawn, lots of new applications that we're not currently sort of envisioning, that we should expect skill and labor demands to change. I don't expect in the near term, persistently high unemployment rates or something like this due to large scale, job displacement. But I think I would be surprised if kind of skill demands and labor demands and what we call different jobs doesn't change, and it potentially could change at quite fast rates, relative to periods of previous sort of general purpose technology diffusion, around the internet and things like this.
Any other thoughts?
I think creative destruction is inevitable and a positive thing generally. So it doesn't matter. We name your general purpose technology here. There's always going to be a wave of job evolution. And there's been some really great work done to show that it's something like 60% of jobs that we have today didn't exist just a few decades ago, and that's a good thing. So the question becomes, what is the rate of replacement versus augmentation, and what is the rate of adoption and diffusion in terms of those two outcomes? And so these are just factors that everybody's watching, everybody's trying to measure. Everybody takes the most recent layoff statement in the news as this signal, but there's a lot of noise in this process, and adoption, the technology is there. This is different in the sense the technology is there, but organizations are not. And so adoption is slow. And from what I'm seeing on the ground of how AI integration and adoption happens, it's messy, it's hard, it's complicated, and so that just takes time.
Okay, the German in me wants to end on time, and we're right at time. If you have other questions, happy to chat more during the break, and we have the rest of the day as well. But I really want to thank you so much for this panel. I think it was very fruitful, and I definitely learned a lot from you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay,
Yes, I'm so on the way. Yeah.
And then, I'm mostly here for
Losing out on expensive. I know. Congratulations.
No, I'm in a
Yes, I.
Oh, great, thanks.
Yeah, happy to meet you.
Yes, I'm love to go. Yes, I'm
Sorry.
What? Oh, okay, now I'm on. Hi, I'm Ashley Gold, Senior Tech Policy Reporter at Axios, and I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester about AI in the workforce. We're going to talk about what she's doing in Congress and her general observations about this very hot topic, as we've seen today. We do have a Slido going. I think they're about to put up the QR code. So if folks want to submit questions for the senator during our talk, they can do so with the Slido. And I will have the questions here to ask the senator. And we want to encourage students in the audience to definitely submit some questions if you have them. So let's start with sort of a high-level question about readiness. So where would you sort of gauge today's workforce in terms of AI readiness and also the government's readiness in preparing the workforce?
Well, I guess, first of all, let me say I'm glad to be here at CSET. Secondly, I will tell you, I said yes to this presentation, this fireside chat, not because I am an expert on all things AI or technology, but because it is probably one of the #1 issues that I hear about. Your question about how ready are we? I think that the technology is happening. I think Congress is behind. I had the opportunity in my state of Delaware to work in various jobs. I was Secretary of Labor. I was head of state personnel, so I got to see the workforce from both an employer perspective, so the hiring, the firing, the training, the recruiting, all of that. But I also got to see it as a person who was working for the Department of Labor. And so jobs have always been something that's really important to me, living your purpose. I always say, if I had another middle name, it'd be Lisa Blunt Jobs Rochester. Like, jobs are so important to me because it is about living your purpose. And so many years I worked in these different jobs, summer youth employment program. And in 2006 to 2012, I got an opportunity to move to Shanghai and lived there with my late husband, who was an engineer. And I remember going to the Shanghai Museum. On the bottom floor is the past, the middle floor is the present, and the top floor is the future. And I noticed the longevity of future that was happening. And I started hearing about, automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And when I came back to the States with Charles, my husband went on a business trip, ruptured his Achilles tendon, playing a game of basketball before meetings, and blood clots went to his heart and lungs. And at 52, the love of my life passed away. I was not sure what I was going to do next with my life. And I remember just kind of being on autopilot. I was numb, I was sad, I was mad. And it wasn't until almost a year to his anniversary that I ran into a guy in front of me in the supermarket, a dad of 3 who put back grapes because they were $9. It kind of snapped me out of my own pain and made me realize I'm okay. I have a home, I have family, I have counseling, But I decided to run for office, having never run for anything in my life. And I asked myself, why me, why now? Mm-hmm. And I just put a big white piece of paper up on my living room wall and started putting things up there. And 3 Ps came up: purpose, it's jobs, and people being able to live their full, authentic self. Peace. I was an international relations major. I've lived and worked and traveled to 33 countries. I love the world. And planet. Without a planet, it's all a moot point. What are we talking about? And so I got into Congress in 2016. I was elected. And while I wasn't on a committee that necessarily was dealing with AI or anything like that, I decided from my experience that I should start a caucus. I started a bipartisan Future of Work caucus in the House because I felt like as a country, we were not having these conversations about things that were coming at us head on. And that how could we even compete globally when we weren't doing that? And so I started the caucus, started conversations, and now in the Senate, I'm on 4 committees, 4 A-level committees that intersect with this. From banking to environment to jobs, all of these, to healthcare. And so if you ask me, where are we? I think we're in some places, we're ahead because of the brilliance of many people in this country who have minds for technology. I'm looking at in education, we're just starting to get literate. I mean, like this whole issue of AI literacy, I introduced the AI literacy bill because I felt like we didn't even have the foundation of what the heck is AI? How are people using AI? How do you protect yourself? And so even having that foundation to me is the place to start. And as I said in the beginning, I think as a country, it's sort of like, depends on where you are, who you ask, and what they're doing. Different school districts are doing different things. The federal government, I think, as it pertains to like Department of Labor and labor market statistics, we're operating like we're back in the 1950s. And so to me, I feel pumped and excited about this issue. I'm one of these people that I'm a pragmatic optimist. Like, I understand there are things we've got to guard against, but at the same time, we have big problems that require big solutions. And as some people said, we have an opportunity here to either be Star Trek or the Terminator. So.
First of all, thank you for telling us that story. So much of this conversation does have to do with just basic things that, you know, make people happy, complete their work, their purpose. And I think a lot of people are spooked and scared, thinking that AI could potentially replace them. And we were just talking back there about how this time around, it's white collar workers that are most at risk for job displacement. So what do you think Congress should do first? If you could tackle 1 or 2 bills and know you could get them done this year, what is first priority?
Yeah, well, you know, just to take a step back to that Future of Work caucus, the first event I held as a House member was on the Future of Work at a Congressional Black Caucus Summit, because my concern at the time was who's going to get left behind. You know, would it be women? Would it be people of color? Would it be, you know, and so that was my first focus. But now we see in the news every day, college students who are coming out with no opportunity for jobs. Even how you search for jobs now and how companies receive resumes has changed so dramatically that it makes it even hard to compete, because at first it was the companies using AI to kind of screen you out, and they would get, you know, instead of 100 resumes, they get 1,000 or 10,000. Now individuals are using AI to write their resumes, and it's sort of canceling each other out. And people are even, I heard a story recently that a company threw the word Jabberwocky into their job description. Did you hear this one? They put the word Jabberwocky into the job description to see what they would get back. They got all these resumes back, and people said, I am the most articulate Jabberwockyist. I can Jabberwocky better than the rest. Like, because we're not really, we haven't figured it all out yet. And so where would I start? First of all, I start with literacy. And I understand that earlier somebody was talking about fluency, like not just to be literate, but to be fluent. I have a question for the audience. You don't have to answer. Everybody knows what ChatGPT is, but how many have ever taken a AI literacy quiz? 1, 2, 3. Well, I took one this weekend through University of Delaware. They have a thing on the site where you could take an AI literacy.
How did it go?
I did pretty well, with the exception of I did not know the word confabulation. Anybody know that word? I see you shaking your head back there. And I have a real world example of it in my life. 2 weeks ago, I was interviewed by someone. And in the interview, they said to me, Senator, I hear that you are an incredible athlete. I was like, no, I'm not. And so now we think of hallucinations, right? But what happened was there were stories out there of me telling a story about me running in a race where it was like about triumph and victory. I came in third place. It was three teams. It was only 3 teams. They were in their cars in the parking lot by the time I got across the finish line. But they confabulated this and said I was this incredible athlete. He then went on in the interview to ask me, he said, I know you've suffered a lot, you know, with the passing of your husband and your dad, your mom, your sister. First of all, my mom is alive and well. My sister, I said to the guy, you know my sister, she's, you know, but it took all of these things and confabulated it. So even just starting with literacy and fluency, I think is really important as a country for educators, for students, for bosses even. I think going above that, I'm interested in data. We don't know what we don't know. I mean, first of all, we're collecting old data. Some of the jobs don't even exist on the things that I think we collect data on. And so to me,
You mean from like a federal?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, like our labor, you know, the things that come into BLS or, not to mention, and I'm not going to do a side note on not politicizing the data and the people who do the work, because that's important too for us to even have confidence in it. But I do think there is bipartisan support for looking at the data and what we collect and how we collect it and how we should collect it. And I thought of a term because I've heard people talk about to AI proof yourself or AI proof your job or whatever. And I don't know if it's AI proof things as much as it is AI flexible things. Like we should be more flexible in how we collect the data and how we're trying to predict what comes in the future. I think, so I've had bills on AI literacy. We have a bill on the workforce of the future that deals with the data. We have a bill on immersive technology, again, a bipartisan bill, because for me, even how we learn, I'm a hands-on kind of person. So I love AR, VR. I have my own glasses during COVID. I was like, I want to go to Paris. And I went and bought me some glasses so I could, you know, walk around in Paris. But there should be an equalization. More people should have access. And so our immersive technology bill is about making sure that we can do training using that technology. You retain it better. It's more exciting to students, to kids, to seniors. And so this bill would give community colleges and career and technical education folks grants to be able to use immersive technology. I think we have, the data bill is called Arrow. And Alicia on our team is here, so you can follow up with Alicia if you want to know more about bills. But also, I do this as part of my office. I do a Shark Tank pitch competition for the legislative aides to like put forward bills. I'm like, you're not competing against each other, you're competing against yourself. Give me your best shot. What should we do that is new, cutting edge, and important? And one of the ideas that came up, that Alicia came up with, was taking the model of ARPA, you know, ARPA that created the internet and, you know, I mean, that's, you know, gets us to these cutting edge things, and applying it to labor. And so we call it ARPA-L. And I'm previewing it here, but it's basically to say, let's not throw out, but forget the past. Let's focus on now and the future and how we can be AI flexible, how we can make sure people live their purpose, how we can make sure that we as a country are strong and compete. And so that's part of our vision, is an ARPA-L, where we can do some new and cutting edge things. And that's why even, you know, centers like this, why the folks that are in this room are so important for us to have connection with as well.
I guess in my observation, there's no shortage of great ideas in Washington about how to make the workforce more ready for AI, how to make it so BLS and DOL are working with more modern names of jobs and getting all the right data. Folks like you are coming up with it, folks at CSET are coming up with it, but there's such a disconnect between all these great ideas from these highly educated and creative people and what can actually get done in Congress. So, I mean, how do you even begin to deal with the fact that getting any bill passed is a massive lift when we are in such a critical moment?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've now been there for a little while.
Yeah.
And I've seen just the challenges of it. But just now, I'm leaving the Senate floor where we voted on the first time in decades a massive housing bill.
Mm-hmm.
We know we have a problem. And for the first time, we've been able to do something together. What happened was you had Tim Scott and Elizabeth Warren who said, we all recognize this is a problem. Every single person on this committee might have an idea, put forth your ideas, and we put forward a package of things that everybody agreed on, came out unanimously. Some of the issues that we're facing now, and it kind of dovetails into this, are data privacy. We have agreement on a lot of the what's.
Mm-hmm.
It's the hows.
Yeah.
That is where we struggle a lot of times. And what I try to encourage people is that, okay, I might not get that bill passed today, but maybe I can get some language that is put into an appropriations bill to move us forward with a study. I might not be able to get that bill done today, but maybe I can get some money put in that will create sandboxes so that we can test out some of these things. To me, and maybe this goes back to who I am and maybe even how I've changed as a person after Charles. I believe you have to try.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe you have to try to find common ground. I have bills on criminal justice reform, clean slate. That's a national movement that is bipartisan. I just try to find some common ground. But I'm also a realist.
Yeah.
And I understand that one of the challenges with this space are things, not one, but some, are issues of money and the influence of money, ethics. How do we do things in an ethical way and who makes those decisions? Equity. You know, I know like even things like ChatGPT, so exciting for so many people. They get out there, they get on it, and now there's a new level that costs money. So does that, you know, so we do have those real basic fundamental disagreements. And this is why it is on you who are out there to push us. A lot of this movement doesn't come from inside the house. It comes from outside the house. And so however, you know, whether it is you coming into our offices, whether it is you doing your letter writing campaigns, whether it is you bringing us information, and not just information that would work at a great university, but in a way that senators can understand. No offense, but a one-pager is always good. Like, you know,
We all love a one-pager.
and charts and you know, but that's always good because I know for myself, I don't presume to have the answers. I tell people when they come in, I'm gonna have an open mind and an open door. That I can commit to.
So you're saying it needs to come from the outside. So when you, yes, but to get the political pressure and sort of the popular sentiment necessary to actually make these, you know, kitchen table issues that people are talking about and thinking about especially in an election year. What are you and fellow Democrats sort of thinking and talking about when it comes to positioning Democrats on this issue and where you can differentiate yourselves with the Republicans that control Washington?
You know, I think I'll probably start where, or say this where I began. It was a kitchen table situation that made me run in the first place, seeing that guy put back those grapes.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking to people in my state, many constituents, many of the people I serve, they're still concerned about the cost of living. And you get into a war and maybe their gas prices or energy prices go up. We already have a situation where healthcare is going to be challenged because of Medicaid cuts and Medicare cuts and increasing high premiums. And so I think, for us, our focus is listening to our constituents, hearing what they say are the challenges and trying to do something about it. And that's why this housing package is so important to us. That it was the first bill I introduced was a housing bill. My first comprehensive policy agenda was a housing policy because of what I heard from people in my state. And I think, this isn't a thing about who wins the House or the Senate, but I think who wins are the people who listen to the people in this moment and who respond to it in real ways that people can really feel and see. Like I said, I never ran for anything before I ran for this. And, my life does not depend on this. But I feel like in some ways, our very existence depends on this moment. And so I'm going to work hard to make sure that people who believe in these things, whether it is access to the information, access to the being prepared, vision for what future jobs could be, equity. I still believe in equity. I don't know about other people, but I do. And I think that when I talk to my constituents, they care too. That's who's going to win. The ones that listen to the people. Power to the people.
And I mean, how do you sort of drive that message home in a time when, billionaires seem to have so much power and AI super PACs are pouring money into state level and federal level races just to fight against laws they don't like? How do you sort of tell people, if you speak up and you talk about how AI is concerning you, you could make a difference? Like, how are you dealing with that in your own life?
A minute ago, I mentioned different influences, and money is one of the ones that I said. And I think I hear that from my constituents too. They're concerned about the influence of money, both in our elections, but also in who has access to knowledge and power. And I would say I grew up in a different era than my kids, but because of the tools, whether it's social media or, and of course we got to be careful about algorithms and things like that. People have more access to information than I did coming up. And I think this is going to be one of those moments in history where it's going to be a combination of trying to use those tools and having critical thinking, which is also a concern, is that we don't lose our ability to critically think. And combining that with some of the old school grassroots things. That's why you see rallies now. That's why you see collective action happening, because it is going to require not just who has the best ads on TV, but who can actually be a trusted person that I talk to. I think even during the pandemic, it wasn't the government telling people to get the vaccines that made a difference. It was the pharmacist. It was your kid's pediatrician. It was your pastor or your rabbi. And so in this moment, I think people are a lot more wise to the influences, and they're watching. And it's part of our job in Congress to also create the guardrails, to create the accountability, and for people to hold us accountable too.
You mentioned, people have greater access to information these days. In that way, social media and the internet is a net good. So on AI, how do you come to the conclusion that ultimately there will be positive aspects of AI for the job market, for the workforce? What personally has sort of convinced you this isn't all scary, this can actually be really great in some ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I use it.
What do you use?
So, like, of course, I use chat. Like, for example, I just did a thing in my office. They finally painted it after a year, and so I actually took a piece of furniture and said, "Hey, put this in my office," and I saw what it looked like, and I use it to ask, questions like, or to search for things that it would take me a long time to do. I mean, so in some ways, it's good for things that are speed, but I also don't use it. I'm a writer and I've written poetry. I would not be using it for my poetry. I've tried it to see what it came up with. It wasn't so great. But I did go to a church service. I was asked to preach at a church service in my state. And this was only a couple years ago. And I asked who in here had ever heard of ChatGPT, and it was about 8 hands. And I did a sermon for Black History Month and Women's History Month, and used the Bible, and I read the thing, and it was pretty good. But then I said, in the words of Tammy Terrell and Marvin Gaye, ain't nothing like the real thing. So then I really preached. So I think there are some things that, I don't even think we've realized that AI is happening in our lives anyway, where there's an elevator or, I almost categorize it as passive, active, and aggressive. There's passive AI that's happening to us every day that we don't really think about. It's just things that are happening in our lives. And I think back to when, bank tellers, when we went to ATMs and everybody was like, all the bank tellers are going to be fired. And they didn't get fired. They got more time to be able to do things that are more quality customer. And so what I would hope is that we would use it to enhance our functions, not replace us. And then there are some things people don't want to do. And so there may be opportunities there. But just like in education, it should enhance. I don't want it to replace. I don't want it to replace our creativity. I don't want it to replace our critical thinking. I don't want it to, I don't want it to have young people do things that harm themselves. That's important. Another great example, I was just talking to somebody in healthcare. If artificial intelligence can scan 100 mammograms and but still have a human be able to say, you know what, this one is problematic. Let's do a deeper dive. Like, if it can help solve problems, then that's a good thing. And we're not even talking about quantum. I mean, when you get to that, how do you solve even bigger problems? But there are ramifications to those things too. Like we were talking about the environment. Where's the connection to our environment and how we deal with energy? That's another thing that it is our responsibility to be asking ourselves these tough questions and solving these things right now. So, like I said, I like technology. I do think that it is problematic, because I'm also not going to ask how many of you in here sleep with your phone. I mean, so a lot of, it's everywhere. And so even being careful about our own mental health is really important as well. So yeah, I think there are some things, like, was it great that it could sort through all those resumes? maybe yes, as a person who used to have to do that. But I remember people that I hired. I remember one person I hired, she was the last one on the certification list. She had the least qualifications. As a matter of fact, she was being judged for if she could type. We don't have typewriters. So again, back to old job descriptions, old ways of thinking about the job. And she turned out to be amazing. Went with me from that job to another job. She got her master's degree and now she's a division director at the insurance department. So, you know, for the state of Delaware. So again, I think there are exciting things and things that are not so exciting. That very first session that I did with the Congressional Black Caucus, I had everybody do a word cloud. When they walked in the room, I said, when you hear future of work, what is the first word that comes to your mind? And then it populated on the screen as people were walking in. When we started, the biggest word on the screen was fear. When we ended the session, the biggest word was opportunity. How do we change fear? Because people are both afraid and they're using it at the same time to opportunity.
And I want to talk about your experience in Delaware a little bit. So looking at some of the proposals for future of work, they want to have the federal government study the data, but also have like state level workforce training programs. So what's your take on what the sort of splitting of duties should be as far as like what states should be leading and what the federal government should be leading when it comes to retraining and reskilling?
That's a great question. I do think there's this high level place for government in terms of being that repository for good data, providing good best practices and information. But I think many times on the state level, we have uniqueness amongst our states and we know our labor market needs. And so even how you design things, it's good to be able to have that flexibility, going back to that future flex, that there's some flexibility that states can do things that work for those different states. Might go out, it's kind of going in and out. But I also think of things like when you think of Department of Labor, you think of things like worker protections, and you think of labor laws. And I do think there's still that place for those labor laws across the country. But think about COVID and how even that changed the way we work and who comes to work, or whether people, you know, my son and my daughter-in-law is an influencer. That was not a job title when I was growing up. Like, what? And my son, he produces music and you know, and I was, as a parent from the other era, I was like, well, where are you getting your health benefits? Like, those are the things that we used to ask. Yeah. But even if we think about our country and our healthcare system, like the Affordable Care Act allowed for people to be able to be flexible too, and to do like that. They have healthcare because of that. So to me, as we look at the future of work, there's even conversation about, will we be working, right? Should there be a guaranteed income? I mean, well, shoot, if you're going to say that, why do you need an income at all? Like, you know, there's a whole host of things that we could be talking about in terms of what the future could look like. But I think having conversations like this are really important. They're important to people like me because I learned from this as well. And then I'm a better representative when I have the data and the knowledge as well. So thanks, CSET.
And hopefully the Department of Labor as well.
Yes.
If some of these bills pass. I wanted to pivot a bit and ask you something more about the news of the day, which is this ongoing saga between the Pentagon and Anthropic. The reason I bring it up in a workforce conversation is because when me and my colleagues at Axios first started covering the federal government's procurement and deployment of AI itself, what we were always told is it's really important for the federal government to use AI, to deploy AI, to contract with AI companies, because they can provide a great example for the private sector of what you can do with AI. And obviously, we're in a moment where a private company is being singled out by the Pentagon. There's a court battle. Many ugly words have been shared. So what example should the private sector take from this extremely high-profile example of sort of government deployment of AI gone terribly wrong?
Well, I think, first of all, this is an unusual time.
Certainly.
I'm just going to say, I'm trying to be diplomatic. I was an IR major, but
Unusual, yes.
yeah. This is an unusual time, but I do think that, first of all, the fact that there is this lawsuit and the fact that other employees of other companies, not even from this company, are joining amicus briefs and things like that, and that to me shows that maybe for the private sector, they're saying, hey, if this happened to them, it could happen to us. Number one. I do think there's a good example of where government, industry, and the people have worked together, did work, and that was with COVID. I mean, literally, the companies could have said, I'm not sharing anything with anybody. I'm keeping my stuff proprietary. If we have to do the Defense Production Act, it was in a way that benefited all of us. And I think what we know from that is that it's possible. What we also know from this is that it depends on who's making the decisions. It's not a decision that I'm involved in or was involved in, but I do think, again, the fact that the private sector is saying this is not right and it's not just this one company is important for the private sector. I think for all of us, the issues related to it are really important issues, because I hear people say they're concerned about autonomous weapon systems. I hear people say they are concerned about surveillance. And that's even surveillance in the workplace too. That's another thing that we haven't talked about in terms of even worker protections. And so we're watching, just like you are in real time, what's happening with this case. But it should put a chilling effect. I'll leave it at that.
And do you think there should be some sort of congressional response to what we're seeing?
Well, I can take a step back and say, again, I've only been in this position for a year. I have never, the stripping of the power of Congress, I think this is happening faster than AI. I mean, it is unbelievable to me that, and so.
That's fast.
Yeah. And so I think it's important for, my colleagues that aren't standing up and saying, no, we have a role. We have a constitutional role and responsibility. And just like whether it's this war or even a case like this, we have an oversight role too. And I think sometimes people say, oh, they just wrote another letter, or, oh, they're having a hearing. Well, if you watched the hearing of Kristi Noem in the judiciary, it wasn't the fact that people were killed. It wasn't the crazy airplane, all of that. That hearing was something that Americans should watch, because that to me was Congress in action, the Senate in action, and it had an impact. So again, back to your voices and what you do and how you contribute, and feeling like, I think sometimes we start believing, it's almost like an algorithm. The more you're told it doesn't matter, you can't change. I started as an intern in a congressional office in 1988. for then Congressman Tom Carper. Went to a town hall meeting. I was pregnant. I was a grad student, had a baby in my belly, one on my hip. And I said, how do I get involved? And he said, you should apply for an internship. I became an intern, then a caseworker helping people, then in his cabinet. Today, I am sitting in his office in the United States Senate. It does make a difference. So for anybody out there, Elizabeth or anybody else that is thinking of an internship, come work with us. Come be a part of this. Because that's the other thing I have a concern about. That people who do have a lot of power and influence are the only ones that are going to be able to do these jobs. I was able to do this because my husband died and I got life insurance. The influence of money is real. And I know you didn't come here you maybe wanted to hear about workforce planning or something. But I hope what you take from this is that we are only here for a minute. What are you going to do while you're here? How are you going to make the world better? How are you going to love? Like, that's the basis of everything I do. Clean drinking water for people in my state that didn't have it. Love. Housing. Love. Healthcare. Love. Jobs and purpose. That's why I'm so focused on the future of work, because I want my granddaughter to have a future.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We do, that was great. We do have some questions from the audience. We have a little time for you to answer them. I'm going to combine two of them
Yes,
here.
because I do have to get back to my day job.
Yes.
So.
Yes. So I guess when there's tough technical issues in the Senate, senators tend to turn to who they think has really done their homework on the issue. So who on AI issues have you been listening to?
Oh, that's such a good question. Besides Alicia on my staff, Alicia, stand up so they can see you in case you want to talk to her afterwards. Stand up, Alicia Pearl. Yay, thank you. So humble. There are a lot of people that are doing work in this space. Whether it is like right now on our immersive technology, we're working with Katie Britt. Strange Bedfellows. On our workforce of the future, we're working with Adam Schiff and Maisie Hirono. But then there are other people like Senator Bennett who have cared about these issues. And then there are people who come at it from different lenses, like it might be healthcare, and I'm talking to a Tammy Baldwin. There's so many different people, and that's why I started a caucus in the House, because I felt like they were like all these different players, but we needed to coordinate it. So I don't know, maybe I'll start a future work caucus in the Senate. I don't know, maybe I'll do that.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
And among your colleagues in Congress, do you feel like enough of them are talking about the impact of AI on labor, and has that increased in recent months?
I think it's increased more because the stories are increasing more. The stories of companies that are saying they laid people off because of AI. Some of that, we don't know if it was, that they overhired after COVID or what that is really it. Some of them really are, which gets back to the issue of data and the need for making sure that we have really good and robust data. But I think the conversations we're having more are around data privacy. A lot of conversations around data privacy. And just last week out of committee, we got a children's privacy bill out of a committee. A lot of conversations now about this, even some from a more punitive perspective and a fear perspective, and then some from the AI literacy perspective as well. So I think you're hearing more conversations about it, but we're also in the middle of everything, like everything, everywhere, all at once. Like that movie is happening now. Like war, you name it. We're in the middle of everything. And so for me, that's why we try to keep this issue in front of people, because Sometimes it's not 50 people that are talking about it. It could be the one person that just cares and cares about it and just won't let it go. And a lot of times I'm that person. My middle name is Blunt. Don't get me started. So
But also jobs.
Blunt Jobs.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the second
Yeah.
middle name. Yeah.
Yes. Another question about the midterms. It seems that the conversation over data center buildouts in people's communities, but also the conversation over the Department of War and Anthropic is cutting in different ways across the political aisle. So I guess let's focus on data centers a bit, since we haven't talked about that yet. Increasingly, politicians like Bernie Sanders are talking about it. And politicians that had previously welcomed the build out of data centers in their communities, like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, have had to sort of walk that back as it got less politically popular. So I would love your take on that.
You know, for me and in our state, this has been a topic of conversation, and probably one where people are coming out to community meetings. Like, not everything gets people riled up. And part of it is because people are concerned about their energy costs going up. People are concerned about the environmental impacts that it will have. But we also know that people are doing all of these things, and it requires that kind of that energy. What I've heard most people, whether it's Bernie or others, talk about is that, hey, many of these companies, you're going to make money. Make sure that you're bringing your power. Making sure that it's environmentally friendly. I mean, I had a conversation with a company, and I had done some research so I could ask about the water generation and how this actually works and how much water would it take and things like that. So I think what you're sensing, this is another one of those areas where it might seem like we're far apart, but people are kind of coming together and saying, I heard it from my constituents. The people in my community have concerns. And at the same time, we as a country want to be able to compete. There are other countries that they don't have the same I'll say protections or even limitations. And so, I mentioned I lived in China. It's a whole different ballgame there. And so for us, trying to find that balance that protects our constituents, but does not stifle innovation, is really the thing that I think all of us want. And that's why you'll see bills now coming forward that will say, hey, look, if you're going to build that part of it too. Yeah.
And here's another question specifically about one of your bills. How optimistic are you that Congress would pass something like the Workforce of the Future Act? What are the main constraints, given that it is bipartisan?
Yeah. It is that, so it isn't bipartisan.
It is not bipartisan.
And that is one of the main constraints. But I'll tell you, as a senator, and even when I was in the House, I would say to people, and even when you come in to meet with somebody, there are some bills that this could potentially sail through. It might get attached to the NDAA or something like that and sail through. There are some bills that you believe in that you got to put a stake in the ground. And you have to say, when the wind changes, because the wind can change, I want to be ready. That's what this bill is. We literally have 8 months to a new election. And so a lot of change will happen. And so for me, part of why we're talking about ARPA-L, ARPA-L is still in the beginning stages. These bills come in different stages. That one, if you ask me if I'm optimistic it'll pass in this session, no. But if you ask me, am I optimistic that it will pass? Yes. Might not be today, might not be tomorrow, but change is coming. Change is coming.
I think the question is always, but will it be too late? Yeah.
Oh, look, somebody said, oh no, will it? For that bill, I wouldn't ask that question of. But the question of, a bigger question of our democracy, will it be too late? Is a bigger question. And like I said, I'm a pragmatic optimist. I don't believe we're here for just a, you know, I don't know why I have every movie in the world in my head. I have The Matrix in my head. We're not batteries plugged into a Matrix. I have all these different, you know, Star Trek versus Terminator. I mean, I got all these different things. But on the bill, that's a bill. What we're doing here and what you're doing, that's the thing that will last. And that's, again, literally on Charles's deathbed, when I asked God, why are we even on this planet? That was it. The word love came up. We're only here to love and be loved. That's it. Love the planet, love God if you believe in God, love yourself, and especially love the people you don't like. The hardest part of all of them, probably. That and love yourself sometimes. But I have to go back to the Senate where I get to do my work, but I will say why I wanted to be here, why I wanted you to see me, is because I wanted you to know there are people that care about what you care about, and that you should connect with us so that we also have the information that you have, the tools that you have, but also so that we can advocate and so that we can stand strong for you as well. So thank you for having me. And here's to the future. Here's to the future.
Thank you so much, Senator. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mic check 1, 2. Can you guys hear me? Can everyone hear me? Great. Awesome. We're going to get started on the next panel now, where we're going to move the conversation a little more into the policy of what we actually do based on what we've heard the rest of the day. But first off, thank you to Senator Blunt Rochester for taking time out of her busy schedule to come and speak to us. Thank you to the audience for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and listen to us. Thank you to the CSET staff who helped put it on, and thank you to the Georgetown staff for helping run it, because it's a big lift. My name's Luke Kozlowski. I'm a senior research analyst here at CSET. I've been at CSET for 5 years. So I was here before ChatGPT, and then I've been here through AD period after deployment. And as the tenor of conversations in and around AI has significantly shifted over the past 5 years. I've been looking at alternative training pipelines for the AI workforce. So how do we get people from community colleges, apprenticeships, non-degree credentials? How do we secure people from those backgrounds with quality AI jobs? I also spilled water down my sock as we were coming up here, so it's all uphill from here. This panel, we're going to be talking about policy solutions to a lot of the issues that we've heard and kind of the existing systems that we're working within it and how they can be improved, what problems they face. So the panelists here today, thank you for joining us. I'm very honored to introduce John Balchunas. He's the Workforce Director for NIMBLE, which is the National Institute for Innovation in Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals, where he is responsible for guiding strategy around workforce and talent development for a federally funded public-private partnership focused on transforming biopharmaceutical manufacturing. His career is largely centered around biopharma workforce and economic development. Thanks for joining us, John. Taylor Magg is the Director of Workforce Policy and Advocacy at Jobs for the Future. She leads JFF's federal and state workforce policy efforts, conducting research, developing solutions, writing policy recommendations, and convening necessary partners to enact change that supports JFF's North Star goal of ensuring 75 million Americans have access to quality jobs. Thank you for joining us, Taylor. And last but not least, Jack Karsten is a research fellow at CSET focused on emerging technologies and the workforce. His research interests include automation, skills training, and the future of work. He previously researched AI regulation, broadband expansion, federal R&D spending, and other technology policy issues at the Brookings Institution and the Progressive Policy Institute. Jack's also on the workforce team with me here at CSET. We're working on a bunch of projects together. So thanks, Jack, for joining us as well. Let's go right into it because we have a lot to cover and not that much time, and we want to hear from you as well. So the first question, each question is kind of going to be for everyone, then we can get into discussion, free will a little bit. Basically, the context for the first question is when you hear discussions about the AI workforce and then also AI's impact on the broader workforce, it's often treated as if it's like an entirely new phenomenon. But really new and emerging technologies specifically, and then like macroeconomic impacts from them is not a new issue at all. We've faced this for centuries. Drawing from past experiences, whether that be in semiconductors or biopharmaceuticals or across the technology landscape, what are policy levers and workforce development systems that we already have in place? What works and what do we need to improve? So first I'm going to throw that to John.
So good question. And what works? What do we need to improve? And again, I'm coming at this from an angle where policy is not my world, and I am very narrowly focused in biopharma manufacturing. And biomanufacturing is my world. And so I'm looking at it through the lens of that industry. And what I can say about what works though in the current world that we live in is we have a very motivated ecosystem nationally. There's a lot of federal dollars, state dollars, local dollars thrown into biopharma or biomanufacturing or biotech workforce development. There's community colleges, nonprofits, universities, companies that have all built up around this model of training the pipeline. They recognize it's important. There's this huge shift towards, as we talked, or as it came up in the panel earlier, around skills first hiring. And I'm going to use a broader interpretation of that word because yes, we are seeing the employers in biopharma gravitate towards apprenticeships and badging and credentials and all the stuff that we talk about when we call skills first hiring or skills based hiring. But it also applies to the universities and just the fact that graduates with a degree need to learn how to sell their skills and not just the degree they have on paper, and that's become ever more critical. And so all that's out there, all that's thriving, all that's working well, and works well for the emerging industries and emerging technologies within biopharma to date. And so I think that should bode well for AI. But I think the big caveat that I throw out there, from our perspective is, especially when you look at technician training and manufacturing level jobs, we can get into this later in the discussion too, so much of the education is grounded in very tangible skills and in a very reductionist mentality of the educator being able to talk to the industry enough to be able to turn it down into being able to pipette or being able to operate a bioreactor or being able to do these very physical, real things that you can say, I have this skill. AI is almost the opposite of that. Yes, we can talk about the skills to know AI, but at some level, we're also talking systems level thinking. And I think the jury's out to some extent whether that's an easy pivot for the average community college student or the average community college student or the average community college educator. And so I think there's a lot that I think the jury is still out trying to figure out. And so I think we have a strong precedent of being able to meet the needs of the emerging industry, but I think the educational model, I don't know, is ready to tackle it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of, you first mentioned the kind of ecosystem of employers, education providers, federal money, state money, all coming together. And then we're also going to touch on skills a lot as we go through this, as other panels did as well. Something we were talking about before we started is basically like, as the technical skills change and emerge in using AI, like the pervasive thing is the need for soft skills, which are much harder to measure. They're much harder to verify. They're much harder to validate. It's hard to prove that you have soft skills. It's hard to be sure that the person you're hiring has soft skills. And it's like potentially the thing that is most important. So we'll come back to that probably in later discussions, but I want to give Taylor a chance to respond to the question.
Thanks, Luke and John. Really quick, I'm going to take a tactic that the senator just used earlier, do a quick survey. Who here is kind of calls himself a workforce wonk, is very familiar with some of our federal workforce programs? Oh, I see Allie's in the back. Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. Is any? Okay, great. Oh, this is one. See a few hands, but this is wonderful. I have an audience that we can talk more deeply about this. So I think just to set the stage a little bit about what we currently have, the infrastructure that currently exists at the national level, the things that we know work, but also, as Luke previously asked, the places that I think we have a lot of work to do to really meet the need of today's labor market. I will just say, for everyone's awareness, right now we have around 47, the Government Accountability Office's estimates we have around 47 federal programs that do some sort of workforce development. That's a lot. And they are spread across all of the agencies. So we have those happening at Department of Labor, Department of Education, Commerce, Health and Human Services, Department of Energy. I could go on. We could just list all of them at this point. But I just want to call that out because I think that's really important to know that workforce is happening basically everywhere. I think, John, to your point. I will mention two programs that really oversee the majority of public workforce dollars in a really focused way. The first is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. WIOA governs our public workforce system. What I will say is working with the system, this is a system that is locally run and we have local workforce boards, which are driving this work. There are 550 of them, over 550, excuse me, across 50 states and territories. So they are in basically every community across the country. So as we think about reaching new talent, as we think about responding to small and mid-sized employers, that infrastructure is super critical to think about. I also want to mention Perkins, or Career and Technical Education. That's another really important policy in the workforce development space. That's really driving a lot of our career-oriented learning in K-12, as well as post-secondary education, happening a lot at community colleges. But I do think those are just two programs. There's many more we could talk about, but that I wanted to specifically call out as we think about some of the federal infrastructure and guardrails that's kind of driving a lot of the work ahead. And while these federal programs provide critical investments and infrastructure, I also mentioned they're just a drop in the bucket and they're just a piece of workforce efforts happening across the country. This does not include investments directly from industry, especially large employers that are doing a lot of their own skill development. It also doesn't include the plethora of policies that states are also championing. If anyone listens to State of the State addresses from governors, you know, I know that might not be the most popular thing, but I like to at times. And workforce is, I would say, the #1 priority in almost every state, regardless of party. And you're hearing some of these efforts that governors are taking to invest their own resources in addition to the federal funds that are available. So again, just to say, the federal support for this is minimal but important, and a lot of other work is happening. I will say what we know works, where we have actual data to say this workforce intervention and policy is working. There are two main areas I wanted to briefly touch on. One is around sector strategies, which is exactly what John was referring to earlier. These are some of the best training programs in the country. They usually lead to higher average impacts on earning for people who participate. This is these sectoral training partnerships are partnerships between industry and the public sector. They're also inclusive of a sector at large. They include large, small, and mid-sized employers. So instead of one employer being in charge for all of the skill development work that is needed, they're able to partner to really co-develop the talent strategy regionally, which is really important to drive real partnership and also scale and sustainability. I just wanted to do a quick data point here. Programs like PerScholas, Project Quest, Year Up, models you all may have heard about. In a year of participating in that program, people are seeing at least $5,000 increase in their earnings within the year. So we actually have proof that this type of model and intervention works, not only for the employer's return on investment, but for the individual themselves. The second, John mentioned apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is an earn and learn model in this country where you are accessing the technical skills that you need on the job alongside your academic pathway while also getting paid. So essentially it is a job, but you're still on your skill development journey. There are such strong impacts of registered apprenticeship in this country. Again, not only for the worker who sees an average of 84,000 earnings annually versus 66,000 for non-apprentices. So you're seeing that real wage impact. Also, employers see about 144%, return on investment for every dollar they spend. So every dollar they're spending, they're getting $1.44 back. So about, again, 144% return on investment, which is really, really strong, especially as employers are thinking about where to invest their money and resources. With all that being said, with all of that great stuff happening and excitement there and that we know works, I will say that these models are underinvested in, they're underutilized, and they're not known everywhere. For example, apprenticeship, only 0.3% of our labor force participates in apprenticeship program. That is very, very minimal. It's because these programs take time, they can be expensive. John can talk more to this from direct experience, and take a lot of capacity from industry to participate in. So I think to wrap up, Luke, before passing to Jack, what I'll say as we think about what works, but areas we need to work on to really respond to this changing economy, to ensure people have rapid access to technical skill developments in the face of AI while also building those durability skills, we really need to think on how we're more responsive to industry, whether that is helping people who are already attached to employment upskill and reskill while they're in a job versus being displaced, but also the systems change that's needed to develop more of these sector strategies and partnerships. We also need more opportunities for high quality training. There's a lot of discussion right now, especially with Workforce Pell happening and opening some post-secondary funds for more workforce programs. What is quality? Are these training programs going to get someone a good job? And we need more opportunities that actually will get people ahead and allow them to advance in the economy, especially through our public workforce system. And then lastly, Luke, you mentioned skills-based hiring, and so did John. I think there's a lot of promise and a lot of excitement moving towards a more skills-based economy. I will say, while some adoption has happened, really implementing that effectively hasn't reached the scale that I think we all have been hoping for, even since we started talking about it. So we're going to talk more today on some policy interventions that can help spearhead that and get us going. But I think those are places we really need to focus on as we navigate this new world of work.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, CSET has done a lot of work on apprenticeships and sector-based investment strategies. And one of them that kind of intersects the two is we did a report on biopharmaceutical manufacturing apprenticeships in North Carolina, which is a sector-based apprenticeship program. And one key lesson that everyone should realize is that like sector-based programs don't work everywhere for all things. Like that one worked particularly well because there was companies there that needed workers, there was training opportunities, and there was workers that there was just a amalgamation of factors that all came together that made that work for there. So we'll probably talk more about this later. John, do you want to jump in?
I want to jump in, but I hate to derail the conversation. But I think something that came to mind, Taylor, when you were speaking, and even more so when you're talking, there is a limitation and a challenge with the sector-based strategies, though, because they are, I don't want to say hamstrung, but the educators and sort of the training infrastructure that is focused on that sector are the ones that are at the table. Right. And when we're talking about something like AI, you're talking about a new technology that's not native to that sector. So if it's, in my case, biopharma or biotech, we don't have the data scientists and the computer science and majors and engineering departments at the table having that conversation, and getting Pfizer or Merck or Genentech or any of our member companies to say, it's important that you data science people come talk to us. That's a harder sell. And so I think there is a challenge inherent with sector-based strategies, especially around AI.
You'll hear a lot about challenges.
I have some ideas for successes, but we'll let Jack talk.
And solutions. Jack, I want to give you a chance to respond to that first question about current system and challenges.
Sure. Thank you, Luke, for moderating, and to John and Taylor for joining the panel. I want to answer your question, Luke, by previewing some research that we have done on the semiconductor manufacturing workforce here in the United States, and some feedback we heard from stakeholders in the industry about what their challenges are with staffing up a lot of these new fabrication plants that have been invested in, that are being built right now. The first one that I didn't really consider before doing this research is there's a huge lack of awareness about a lot of these jobs. We use technology on a daily basis. We carry it around in our pocket, and that's got just tons and tons of semiconductors embedded within it, but they're very, they're hidden, they're abstracted away. Like, you don't think about what what runs your smartphone, what runs all your other appliances and devices. And since you're not thinking about that, you're not thinking about who makes that technology, who designs it, who develops it, who actually puts it together. And if you're not thinking about the jobs, you're not thinking about the skills you need to get the jobs, you're not thinking about what classes you need to get skills, and on and on. So just like huge lack of awareness about these jobs, and a lot of employers and a lot of nonprofits working in this space, like that's an issue that they're trying to tackle, is like, how do we get students and graduates aware of these jobs, and how do we seed that awareness pretty early, like at the K-12 level, embedding these concepts in STEM classes, having career talks, like that kind of thing, just to prime students, prime workers for thinking about taking these jobs that are going to be in really high demand going forward, as all these data centers get built and all these other things that demand a lot of chips come online. The second finding I want to highlight is just a need for partnerships between employers and training providers and higher education providers. We've heard a lot about partnerships throughout today, but just another one specific to semiconductor manufacturing is that this equipment is just very expensive. These fabrication plants are billions of dollars worth of investment. It's just very expensive to get these machines that actually do the manufacturing. So to get hands-on experience, these workers need to be located either pretty close to the actual plants that are doing the building, and employers need to have partnerships to get them with time in the fab, like actually working with the machines, or you need to have sort of massive or larger higher education systems pool their resources to build a training facility that lots of different schools can utilize and send students to. So we've seen sort of both those models come up already. The State University of New York system, they have sort of that model where like they've all invested in one training facility that schools can use. And then in Arizona, it's more the employer educator partnership model where the public universities and community colleges around the Phoenix area can send students to Intel, to TSMC, and all these other manufacturers that are located there. Finally, I want to talk about representation in the workforce and the recruitment and retainment problem. A lot of the stakeholders we talked to mentioned the fact that there's just not enough workers going through the talent pipeline to start with at the beginning of the pipeline, and then not enough exiting the pipeline at the end and actually making it to these jobs. And to staff up and to fill our demands for future, we just need many more people going through, and that's going to mean reaching out to underrepresented groups in this industry. That's women, people of color, and part of that outreach is going to where those populations are at and telling them like, yes, you too can be a part of this industry. You too can find work here, even though currently it's not as many people not as well represented now, but in the future, if this takes off, you can sort of create a virtuous cycle where more leaders that look like these underrepresented groups, they can offer mentorship to these new recruits and help retain those workers, and then they're more visible for the next cohort of workers to come into the industry. So yeah, those are just some of the problems and solutions I want to highlight from our research on the semiconductor workforce.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Very well said. Yeah, the more people who can enter the pipeline, the faster you can kind of reduce those chilling effects that those people face as they enter. It's very much a virtuous cycle, as you said. So now that we've stepped back and kind of drawn some generalizable lessons from emerging technology, there are some AI-specific features of this current moment that when it comes to workforce development and the labor market. Unfortunately, as you heard some today, and then if you just listen to the discourse, it's unclear what the severity of those impacts are going to be. It's unclear how they're going to manifest, when and where. It's all very uncertain. But put very simply, it's kind of a spectrum of potential outcomes. The first is basically that AI kind of just diffuses through the economy like a normal technology with associated job displacement, job change, and job creation. So something like the IT revolution that takes place over a period of time. Second possible kind of outcome is that AI does have a more immediate and major impact, but it's highly segmented and targeted on specific industries. That's the kind of the classic example you've heard today and probably have heard elsewhere is that like entry-level white collar work all of a sudden starts reducing rapidly. So it's still a major effect, but it's still not spread out over the entire economy. And it's kind of like the impact is not immediately felt across the entire economy. And the third scenario is that we see rapid and fast advancement, and all of a sudden we have 10, 15, 20% labor market shocks with unemployment at those levels. So it's kind of like, could be anywhere on that spectrum, unsure when, unsure how. But given that long context, two-part question, and you can answer either. Basically, are our current workforce and training systems built to handle the first two scenarios? So that's kind of normal technological change or a more targeted disruption. And then second, if AI does create a kind of much faster, broader employment shock, what would we need to change to address that if it were to come? So I'll start with Taylor.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to start off pessimistic, but I promise my response does have some positive notes. I will just answer no. Our systems are not prepared for any of the scenarios you just mentioned, Luke. If people do think back to the COVID-19 pandemic, I think that was a really great example about how our public systems were not prepared for a bunch of people that were all of a sudden dislocated from work and unable to truly get the resources they needed to not only navigate that time of disruption, which was relatively brief as we think about what was needed at the time, but then also re-engage in the labor market when they were ready to. So happy to share more about lessons there, but I think just generally no. What I did want to talk about, Luke, without sharing more challenges than I think we've already laid out, is also acknowledging where there's a lot of promise in some actually concrete policy exemplars that are happening right now that I think can help us get there. The first, Jack, I want to build on your point around career navigation and exposure to work. Too few people truly understand all of the job opportunities that are available to them. I heard a question earlier about someone who was in their post-secondary education journey and was realizing like, hey, I'm actually better off doing this work on my own and getting right into the workforce. But so few people have access to understanding how their skills best apply to available work and also just the amount of jobs that are available to them. This is increasingly important now as jobs are changing so quickly. But also to Luke, your point, we don't really have the data yet to understand how jobs are changing quickly or working as closely with employers to translate that labor market information into a way that is digestible and accessible for the public. So one thing that's happening now from this administration that I think is really interesting is they, in their AI action plan, as well as the talent strategy plan that they put out across Commerce, Department of Labor and Education back in August, they announced the launch of an AI workforce research hub. This hub would be at Department of Labor, and honestly, based on remarks from Senator Blunt Rochester, does not go as far as she wants to see around R&D, which I'm very supportive of, but it kind of is the first step in an R&D element of Department of Labor specifically focused on AI. So the hub's really there to work with industry, work with regional public partners, what are the true impacts of AI in your community, elevate those learnings and findings nationally, and also elevate best practices and innovation to respond to those transitions. So I think that's a really promising practice to address some of the challenges around labor market information and exposure to that information on the ground. The other thing, getting to John's point around the capacity of the public system to really respond to the changing demand and having the skill sets needed to advise around a sector strategy in AI or an AI-infused sector partnership, that is a huge barrier, is the capacity of our public sector staff and having the AI literacy that they need to respond accordingly. So when you look at community college faculty or workforce board career navigators, do they understand how to use AI? Do they understand what that means for the clients that are coming to them and in their doors? One project that I also wanted to flag, which is a true federal public-private partnership, is funds from the National Science Foundation, or NSF. They funded a community college consortium starting in Miami-Dade College down in Miami. That college is working in partnership with many other community colleges across the country to build the capacity of their faculty to not only leverage and use AI themselves in the classroom, but also teach it so the students going through their pathways and programs are getting the skills that they need to enter the labor market and be effective. Because of that initial public investment, now employers like Microsoft and Google are at the table and investing real money to support the capacity building of community colleges across the country. So I think that's a perfect example, again, about how the public sector provided that seed investment and then private sector came and they're addressing a need that is really important as we are trying to move forward and ensure our public systems are more innovative and responsive. And lastly, all I'll say, and I think I heard this in the panel before, Senator Blunt Rochester, was just the need to really be industry responsive. I know I mentioned that in my opening remarks, but just to build on that a bit more, our public workforce system is really looking at either serving youth, especially those that are out of school and work, or those that are adults that are unemployed. So we kind of miss out on a lot of workers that might be in need of upskilling and reskilling while they are attached to employment. So we think that it's really important to not only incentivize employers to focus more on human capital development and talent development, but also make sure the public sector is providing an incentive to do that effectively. One of the things that we were really excited about in some of reauthorization efforts in Congress around the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, that did not pass last Congress, but it was this close. It was about to.
Every year.
It was a tweet. There was a tweet that took it down. It was very sad, but we were so close. Alicia, not to call you out, but I know was working very hard on that piece of policy for Senator Blunt Rochester when she was in the House at the time. Anyway, just to say that we were very close. But one thing that reauthorization did would allow public workforce dollar funds to support what they call incumbent worker training, which is the training of individuals, again, while they're employed and partnering with industry to do that. Right now, that is allowable through the law, but what it would do was in places of low unemployment and high labor force participation, it would allow you to have more flexibility. So you could use more of your dollars to then work directly with industry to help with those upskilling and reskilling needs. So I definitely think, having those incentives and those, even if it's not a ton of resources, just a little bit to get employers to say, hey, this will actually help me now, invest in my talent now, versus me having to lay off a bunch of workers and not know what's going to happen to them. And I guess last thing I'll say before passing it back, Luke, is while I am saying all these great solutions and policy ideas, I will acknowledge that all of this costs money. And our public workforce system especially is pretty under-resourced. Nationally, we spend around 0.1% of GDP on workforce development efforts. And just to compare it to other developed nations, it's around 0.5% of GDP. So we are definitely underspending on this front. And I think that is also something to consider as we're thinking about the resources necessary to really, meet the moment and adopt some of these critical solutions.
Thank you very much. That was a comprehensive and very useful overview. And I do appreciate ending with the need for money. Sometimes when you talk about community college outcomes, some people will say like, oh, completion rates are very low. It's like the way to get completion rates up is to give more money to community colleges. It's very there's evidence. It's very simple. But I do want to give. John, do you have a response to the other question?
Well, I do, and I could just say exclamation point on everything you said and then pass it. But to try and verbalize some of those exclamation points, I think first I'd probably add some context specific to biopharma in terms of your A, B, and C scenarios, and I think it depends on what sector within biotech or biopharma you're looking at, because it's all different. I probably think that's extrapolatable to any industry. You can't just say the impact on aerospace is this or the impact on whatever, because you look at, say, within biotech or biopharma, in the discovery R&D world, AI is ubiquitous. It's been being used heavily in drug discovery. It's ramped up timelines significantly, all kinds of tools, all kinds of workforce. They're hiring differently. They're bringing in data scientists and statisticians. It's out there. And that's one thing. But when you get into kind of manufacturing and the closer that medicine is getting to a patient, you're talking FDA regulations, and you're talking there has to be and will always be a human in the loop. And that human fact checking and everything is a piece of that will somewhat make it a lot slower, and by also by that nature, the industry is a lot more conservative in terms of their ability to adopt some of these AI and tools when down at sort of the manufacturing shop floor. That said, I think I've been hearing, and I'm going to get back to back to this somewhat was said earlier, like when you look at those manufacturing employees and where their skills are changing. I was in a session last week and somebody made a comment. This is somebody from Eli Lilly who was just noting that, the impact of AI and data science and machine learning on the manufacturing workforce moving forward is that operators are going to move from being people that execute processes to people that interpret data and drive insights. And, part of the challenge in getting back to a word that Senator Blunt Rochester uses, critical thinking, and all that is critical thinking. And that is not skill that operators are, I want to say, instilled that they have, and they do. And I think so. The part of the problem is a cultural environment that embraces those operators as having those critical thinking skills that they do, because they've been in that environment for years and years and years, and so they know the process. They can think critically, but they just haven't been empowered. But getting back to needs and where I think the system does need work, and this is, again, the exclamation point and where I was going, is around incumbent worker training. And again, building some of these new skills with the existing manufacturing workforce in our industry, but in most industries, is going to take a lot more dollars from the standpoint of incumbent worker training. The big challenge that I see, though, is, so much of, the federal dollars towards incumbent worker training has caps in terms of the amount of income that a person's making. I look at even the lower level operator jobs in biopharma, they make too much money to qualify for any federal support on incumbent worker training. And so getting back to what was said earlier, the onus is really going to be on the employer, and the employer is going to have to recognize that they're going to need to invest and buy into their own employees' development a lot more heavily than they have.
That's great, Jack.
Yeah, so I'm going to focus on, first I want to endorse everything that John and Taylor have said already about existing programs. And then I want to address the second part of Luke's question, like what happens if there's like an unemployment shock? Yeah, like Taylor, my answer is going to start pessimistic, but maybe end up optimistic. Yeah, so I just want to remind, or this question reminded me of times in US history where we've had these big unemployment shocks. And I went back to the Great Depression, but also, as Taylor mentioned, like a COVID, where lots of people were sort of thrown out of work like over a short period of time. The Great Depression, that led to lots of social safety nets that were developed, and some of them still exist today, like Social Security Administration. So we can think about like if AI does cause a lot of unemployment, 20-30%, like certainly some of those things might be necessary again. And if you think workforce training is expensive, safety net's also very expensive. But luckily I don't have to think about how to pay for it. We're just, not yet. And then, yeah, so like, and then the COVID shutdowns, like that was a very rapid response from Congress, getting stimulus checks out to everyone, sending money to states for enhanced unemployment insurance. In some cases, people were making more on this enhanced unemployment insurance than they were at their jobs. So we do have, historical, policies that we've had to employ to deal with unemployment shocks that we could lean on again if AI causes mass unemployment. But that is only to buy time for these workforce programs to transition the workforce and the economy to one where AI is more prevalent and where people are going to need to gain all these skills to work with AI.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the idea of time, because like think about if you lost your job. Like job loss is often a traumatic experience, and the thing that unemployment insurance affords you is just time, like time to get back on your feet, get to find the training that you need, find a new job, just time. We're running a little close. Speaking of time, we're running a little tight on time. So I'm going to smash together my last two questions, and hopefully it makes some semblance of sense. Basically, we talked on last Thursday, and then the next day, Secretary Raimondo released this op-ed in the New York Times that was basically saying that the third scenario, the major impact, is going to happen, and we need to like take action now. So I'm just going to quote briefly from the article. What we need is a new grand bargain between the public and private sectors, one in which employers are held responsible for defining skills essential to the AI economy and for creating pathways into jobs, and the government invests in the training, incentives, and safety nets that help workers move quickly into them. And then she went on to list a litany of policy options, which is the things that we talked about the previous day. So the final question I was going to ask is basically the like magic wand question that often gets asked at panels. But like those questions often I'm like, does that need a magic wand or just like a really good marketing team? So I'm going to ask it in this way. You've got three options. What's a useful policy that would actually be easy to implement? Or what's a useful policy that is easy to implement in theory, but it's hard in practice? And then C, what's the most important thing related to workforce development that needs to happen regardless of its feasibility? So we're probably going to cover the things that she covered in the article a bit, but first I'll throw it over to Jack.
Yeah. So my magic wand policy would be to just increase the quantity of skilled and high skilled immigration to this country. In our research about the semiconductor manufacturing workforce, you learn pretty quickly just how much of that workforce is born outside the U.S. And so obviously, like going forward, we do need to increase the native born, the domestic workforce, skill up our domestic workforce to take these jobs. But in the near term, like a lot of that talent is going to come from abroad or from people who were born outside the U.S. but studied here in the U.S. So just provide the immigration pathways, be it or non-immigrant. So like work visas, temporary work visas, or green cards, citizenship for people who want to pursue that. Just make that easier for the people with the talent to stay here and contribute to our economy. And also, like, knowledge transfer is a big part of this. They will be they'll do a lot to teach, to train U.S. workers on a lot of these things. So yeah, my magic wand, increase high school immigration.
Great. John, how about you?
So in terms of biggest, I'd probably answer the third piece of that question, sort of the biggest challenge or the biggest sort of workforce piece to this that needs to be sort of realized and thought about is really industry has to be at the table. And so again, getting back to public-private partnerships, and I'd take it far bigger than Nimble, but look at the Manufacturing USA model that is looking at all of different sectors of advanced manufacturing, and Nimble is one of a collection of 17 different institutes. We in our case have our critical mass of industry, but the same holds true for everywhere else. And I say that because in the world of AI, like just in doing some of the homework that I was doing prior to coming here for this, is you can start looking at, okay, let me Google and start doing research and ask AI about the impact of AI on biopharma manufacturing, and you get a bunch of reports from all the big consulting companies, and it's all aspirational, it's all pie in the sky. It's not what the actual manufacturers and the actual companies are actually doing on their shop floor, and it's not real data that the educators know what to do with. And so unless the industry is actually at the table working with those talent providers, it's not going to move the needle.
Taylor?
Awesome. Well, I'm going to answer number 2 because I feel like this is the theme of my portfolio, which is useful policy that seems easy to implement, but actually is very hard. And I do think people in the workforce space, you heard it from this Senator Blunt Rochester earlier, there's a lot of bipartisanship on workforce development, especially in response to the AI trends that we were talking about today on this panel. However, actually doing it is where the rubber meets the road, and it's very difficult. I'm cheating a little bit, Luke. I promise I'll be quick, but I'm going to just say 2 quick examples of that. One is around skills-based hiring. There's been this push to really evaluate people based on their skills and work experiences versus just the credentials that they have, like a college degree. And we saw a lot of momentum federally. We saw the Trump administration, Biden administration say, yes, we agree, we're doing it for federal workforce as well. We saw almost all governors take it up to in their states passing executive orders. And then when you look at the numbers, you're like, oh, wait, this is actually really hard to do in practice and it sounds really good and the intent's really good, but it's really hard because you not only need the big P policy to drive that transformation, you also need the small P of HR departments saying like, wait, okay, how do I actually understand all the skills that this person has and how does that relate to the job description I have? And I know employers are increasingly, and John, I know you spoke to this, wanting to move that direction, but are nervous and don't understand how to actually validate the skills that someone lists. So just to say, I think that one is something everyone agrees on. People are moving the needle, but is still difficult. And then my second would be on apprenticeship or other work-based learning models. Again, huge bipartisan support. Governors, federal leaders, everyone's really excited about expanding these opportunities, but it is really hard in practice to do because it is expensive, it takes a lot of capacity, and because it is a very comprehensive training model, it takes time, and again, people need to be aware of it as well, Jack, and there is an underutilization from the public or understanding these options exist. So a lot of exciting momentum there, but I still think it's one of those areas where even though policy and investments are moving forward, we're still not really reaching the scale that we would have expected to with the energy that's been put behind it. And I know there's, we could talk this whole panel on solutions to get there, but I think those are things that are, in theory easy, but actually become really difficult to implement and sustain and scale.
Yeah, I completely agree. We could keep talking forever, but we do want to get to some Q&A. Similar to the last panel, as we are part of Georgetown University, we encourage students to raise their hand first and we can get them to ask some questions. I'm going to parrot a talking point from my director, Helen, where she said a question is 1 to 2 sentences that ends in a question mark. So if you raise your hand, any students, we have a mic floating around and we'll get to you, and then we can move on to the broader audience. No students.
Okay, I know you said 1 to 2 sentences, so this will be short and vague. How do you, so this is something I think about a lot. How do you measure something that obviously is going to be something that we haven't seen ever before, like the impact of AI, be it AGI, whatever. And this really interesting thing someone said on the panel, you know, when will it be, if it will be too late enough for democracy to sustain itself and be upheld? Like overall, how are you thinking about these unknowns and what factors? Like, would love to learn more about that.
I don't have an answer. So I don't have an answer to either, but I think but I can acknowledge the first question is a difficult, just to acknowledge the first one. And again, I was at a conference last week and there was a brilliant speaker from Columbia University who was just acknowledging that AI is rewriting the script on science in general. And so, you know, if you look at science through all of the 20th century, it has all been, to use the word I used earlier, reductionist in nature. It's always about simplifying everything down to the simplest nature. AI is the opposite. It is systems level at its core. And I think that's part of why we are struggling as a society to understand how to measure its impact. It's just, we haven't figured it out yet. So I think we'll get there, but I don't know that we have the scientific tools to think about that, you know, holistically or systematically.
And if I could add briefly, I also think that's leading to some of the policy stagnation, whether that's nationally or in states. For example, you know, there's conflicting views on how to respond to the disruption with AI because people don't exactly know what that will be. To Luke's point, there's all these different scenarios. You have some, I'm just using federal because we're right here in DC and can see the Capitol, but you have some federal leaders that say, hey, we just need to adjust these reauthorization policies and embed AI literacy and just make it so the programs I'm talking about, like WIOA or Perkins, will just include AI and we'll be good to go. There are other leaders saying that will absolutely not be enough. Those are piecemeal small policies to address a huge need. And we're going to need a Trade Adjustment Assistance Act 2.0 to respond to not only AI impacted workforce, but any impacted workers and dislocation. And that investment looks a lot different. That time and energy to reach a reauthorization agreement looks a lot different. So I also think that's where some of the lack of action is related to truly understanding what to expect. I don't think policymakers want to make a big bet and spend all this money and know that it might not be used effectively or have a strong return on investment if that doesn't actually happen. So not answering your question, but just adding on to it, that I do think that's one of the reasons why we're kind of in this chicken and egg situation a bit as we are today.
Sure. One way that I've had trouble figuring out how to say this, so I'm going to try and do it live on a panel. Basically, like the worst case impact that you're talking about, that's like disastrous. The way to mitigate it is to build up the systems that we're talking about here today. And like in the scenario where that eventuality doesn't come to pass, those systems are still good. Like we're not losing anything by investing. We're actually net gaining strongly by investing in these systems already. And then if the worst situation does come to pass, they're ready. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about a lot of this now, is like, this is a good thing just in general. It's also a good thing if there's labor market impacts from AI that we aren't able to accurately predict when, where, how. Like if we build up the systems now, we can address those more readily and build them up as they come. Do we have any other in the back there?
Sure. Hi, Jay Rickes, a research engineer here. I just was curious because in 1926, Henry Ford, motivated his employees that it wasn't really necessary, to work a long time just to get some productivity. And now here, 2026, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that most young people, especially advocating for Gen Z and millennials, want to make their fitness workouts after work, maybe possibly go on a date, maybe go to Dubai on the weekend. I'm curious, like, I think with entrepreneurism, at least in the spirit of things, becoming such a prevalent like desire for young people, maybe relooking at, I think 40-hour work weeks maybe being reduced to some degree, because I mean, I don't think it takes a lot of math to realize that, if I could get my work done and now I've got tools that are better than 1926, I should be able to make my flight on time and not be held back. So I'm just curious about reduction in the work hours.
Well, but I think the way I'd react to that is to say, from my perspective, that is why I think earlier it was mentioned career awareness is so important, because there are so many career paths that will give the emerging generation that level of flexibility where they're working fewer hours. They're able to go to Dubai on the weekend and make twice as much money as any of us could ever dream of making in doing that. But I think there's all kinds of realistic opportunities to do that are on the sites of any student who's in high school and college. And I think at the detriment of those industries that exist, and I think it's going to be hard to get biopharma or aerospace or any of these big industries to suddenly pivot and say, okay, no, 30-hour weeks are fine. Most of these plants run 24 hours a day, and they're not going to be able to reduce, headcount at that level, which makes it that much harder to attract talent.
I also want to say thank you for calling millennials young. That was so great. I appreciate that. I will just say something really brief. I do think you raised a good point, though. I'm not going to weigh in on the 40-hour work week or those elements, but around productivity, I will say there's been some reports on how AI can support increased productivity, not only for white-collar type employment, but also for other industries. And manufacturing has been cited a lot of just like, as you use it to enhance technology, how you can actually get more from the humans that are working in the job. And I even think about my own job and career and how I'm able to access and use my time more effectively. So it's almost like not reducing my hours of work, but making my hours of work mean more and have a greater impact. So again, positive spin on it. But I do think as we think about like the actual productivity of workers, that's something to look at. And Jack, I know you were getting to.
Yeah, no, your mention of 1926 brought to mind this famous essay written by this British economist, John Maynard Keynes. He, writing in the early 20th century, he theorized that like advances in technology would mean that his grandchildren would only have to work like 15-hour work weeks. And obviously we're not there yet, but just thinking about like the process by which technology leads to shorter amounts of time worked. It's not automatic like that. We're like most of us are working 40-hour work weeks. It hasn't changed a lot over time. It's really like changes to work processes and unions, like a negotiation between employers and their employees and their representatives and their employers, like negotiating down, like, look, technology's made us this more productive. We deserve this many fewer hours for the same pay. That's sort of the process by which we get to shorter work weeks, more money, trips to Dubai on the weekend. So yeah, just that short history lesson.
Yeah. Chris, do we have time for one more? Okay, one more.
Hi, thank you so much. I've heard a lot about kind of how the current workforce needs to be right-sized to meet the moment, but I'm curious how you all see down the pipeline education playing into this. I have a lot of friends that are teachers, and they're really concerned about the current generation, their ability to develop critical thinking skills, growing up with all these tools existing around them. So I'm curious how you all see education fitting into this picture in preparing the 15-year, 20-year down the line workforce.
I'm happy to start really quickly. I'm going to use an, again, positive example, but I think represents a lot of the direction that our public schools are taking to respond to AI, but also create responsible AI use while also the critical skills that are needed. Gwinnett County in Georgia, right outside public schools, right outside of Atlanta, they are doing some really, really innovative work around AI. They're basically leveraging their federal Perkins dollars or career and technical education to not only help support some of the teacher development and capacity work I was speaking to, but also create AI-related pathways for their high school students. To John's point, some of that is ever changing because the AI pathways in the curriculum obviously now is changing every month, but they're trying to have some, structure and sustainability of that program. But what I think is so important of that model, to your point around critical thinking, responsibility, those durable skill sets, they are requiring a work-based learning model alongside that AI literacy and learning. So as students are having, their more technical training, they are getting then that work experience or exposure to work alongside of that academic learning, which I think is really important. The other thing that they're mentioning is that that is only offered to career and technical education students through Perkins. And right now, our systems are a bit siloed, where if you're not in a career technical pathway, you don't have access to that AI learning in that school district, which obviously is so unfortunate, because that's not only helping the kind of more career-oriented student body, but that could also help people that aren't in those coursework have very much a benefit of that. So I just wanted to share that example because they're trying to expand it to the entire student body to have access to that course, not only those eligible or interested in the career track that that school provides. And then I think it also gets to your question just on how you do this responsibly, because alongside that technical learning, they are, again, having to kind of contextualize it a bit more. And we find that, to Luke's point, AI or not, that contextualized learning for young people is so important to not only get them to really understand what they're actually learning. And I think with AI, that is so, so important. So they're not just using it without understanding what it really means. And then obviously having that responsible use as well. So happy to, afterwards share more about the program, but they're doing really amazing work. And I think other school districts and education providers should be looking to them as an exemplar in the country.
And I think that'll wrap us up for our panel. This is a vast subject. We could have talked about more education. We could have talked more about apprenticeships, organized labor as a role. Like, there's a lot we didn't cover. So find us afterwards, and I'm sure we'll talk to you. But thanks for joining us, the panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Krista.
Well, thank you so much to Luke and our panelists, and to Matthias and our guest earlier this afternoon, and of course to Senator Blunt Rochester and Ashley Gold. Luke, how are the socks doing? Okay, well, it didn't slow down the panel, so I think it's okay. The future of the tech workforce is on everybody's mind. I really appreciate you all shedding light on this important topic. I've seen it everywhere, from the front page headlines to the text my dad sends me every week asking what's going on with AI and jobs. So we have some information that you've shed light on, and then also some good information that I can take back to my dad. So I appreciate that. I'm Krista Bennett. I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement here at CSET. So I just want to tell you a little bit about CSET and how you can stay engaged before we break for some wine and coffee and snacks. We are a center that was started, as Helen said, in 2019 on the topic of national security, AI, and emerging technology. And this looks like a few different things, or a few different research areas that we look at. They include the workforce, like we've talked about today, China Watch, biotech, cyber AI, AI governance, semiconductors, open source and open models, operationalizing AI for the military, implications of frontier AI, and a few other things too, some categories that fall into that. CSET is also unique in that we have an in-house data team, about 15 data scientists, engineers, other technologists. So our work really is grounded in a foundation of data. You can access our research at cset.georgetown.edu. You can subscribe to updates that will let you know, that will give you emails when we have publications that are released, or new data tools, other events that we want you to know about. You can also join CSET Forum. The Forum is a membership program for companies and organizations who want to stay more engaged, want to interact more with CSET. You receive invitations to exclusive events and the opportunity to request briefings from our experts. So you can check that out online, or meet me in the back. I would love to chat with you about it. But thank you again for coming this afternoon.